Marco DeLuca never expected a stranger to unlock his mother's voice, or his heart. When a young waitress speaks fluent Italian to his widowed mother in a Boston restaurant, decades of silence shatter in an instant. Lucia DeLuca, a woman who hasn't smiled in years, suddenly laughs like the girl she once was. Marco watches, transfixed, as this mysterious Elena Rossi awakens something he thought his world had killed. Hope. But in his dangerous life, hope comes with a price, and loving someone means putting them in the crosshairs. If you're ready for a story about love that defies danger, tradition, and destiny itself, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels across the world. Net. The North End smelled like it always did on Thursday evenings: garlic, fresh bread, and the faint bitterness of espresso lingering in the autumn air. Marco DeLuca stepped out of the black Mercedes, his tailored suit catching the glow of streetlights as his driver, Tony, moved quickly to open the rear passenger door. "Easy, Mama," Marco said softly, extending his hand. Lucia DeLuca emerged slowly, her small frame wrapped in a charcoal wool coat that seemed too heavy for her delicate shoulders. At 72, she carried herself with the posture of old-world dignity, but her eyes, those dark, endless eyes, held nothing but emptiness. She hadn't smiled in so long that Marco sometimes forgot she ever could. "Same place?" Tony asked, already knowing the answer. "Same place," Marco confirmed. Thursday nights were sacred. No matter what chaos erupted in his world, and chaos was a constant companion when you controlled half the organized operations in Boston, Marco never missed dinner with his mother. It was the one promise he'd made to his father before the old man died. And Marco DeLuca was many things, but he was not a man who broke promises. They walked into Trattoria Bella Vista, a modest Italian restaurant tucked between a bakery and a tailor shop. The owner, Giovanni, greeted them with the reverent warmth reserved for royalty. "Signor DeLuca, Signora Lucia, your table is ready." Marco nodded, one hand resting protectively on his mother's back as they moved through the dimly lit dining room. Other patrons glanced up briefly, then looked away just as quickly. People in the North End knew who Marco was. They knew better than to stare. Their usual table sat in the back corner, positioned perfectly so Marco could see both entrances. Old habits, survival habits. Lucia settled into her chair without a word, her gnarled hands folding primly in her lap. Marco watched her, his jaw tightening. Every week, the same silence. Every week, the same hollow stare at the tablecloth, as if the world had gone gray and she was simply waiting for it to end. He couldn't remember the last time she'd spoken more than 3 words in a row. "Wine, Mama?" he asked gently, though he already knew she'd barely touch it. She nodded, barely. Giovanni appeared with menus and a basket of bread still warm from the oven. "Your usual server called in sick tonight, Signor DeLuca, but don't worry, we have someone excellent covering. She'll take very good care of you." Marco waved a dismissive hand. He didn't care who brought the food as long as it was good and the evening remained peaceful. Then she appeared. She moved through the dining room with the kind of grace that came from years of balancing heavy trays and navigating crowded spaces, but there was something else, a quiet confidence in the way she carried herself. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with dark hair pulled back in a neat bun and warm brown eyes that actually made contact when she smiled. "Good evening," she said, her voice gentle but clear. "My name is Elena. I'll be taking care of you tonight." Marco barely glanced up from the menu. "Water for the table. Wine list." "Of course." She set down 2 glasses of water with practiced efficiency, then turned to Lucia. And that's when everything changed. "Buonasera, signora," Elena said, her voice shifting into flawless Italian. "Come sta questa sera? Spero che la serata sia gentile con lei." "Good evening, signora. How are you this evening? I hope the night is treating you kindly." Marco's head snapped up. Lucia's hands, which had been motionless in her lap, trembled. Her eyes, those hollow, distant eyes, suddenly focused, sharpening with something Marco hadn't seen in years. Tu parli italiano?" Lucia whispered, her voice crackling like old paper coming to life. You speak Italian?" Elena's smile deepened, genuine and warm. Sì, signora. La mia nonna era di Napoli. Mi ha insegnato che la lingua è il cuore della famiglia. Yes, signora. My grandmother was from Naples. She taught me that language is the heart of family. Lucia's breath caught. Her hands rose slowly to her mouth, and for the first time in a decade, tears filled her eyes. Not tears of sorrow, but something else entirely. Napoli, she breathed. Anch'io sono di Napoli. Naples. I too. I am also from Naples. Marco sat frozen, his mind struggling to process what he was witnessing. His mother, this woman who barely spoke, who moved through life like a ghost, was suddenly animated, alive, leaning forward in her chair as if someone had just turned on a light inside her. Elena's expression softened with understanding. She pulled out her notepad but didn't look at it. Instead, she kept her eyes on Lucia, speaking with the kind of patience and respect that made Marco's chest tighten. Allora dobbiamo assicurarci che abbia un pasto degno di Napoli stasera, Elena said. Cosa desidera? Qualcosa che le ricorda casa. Then we must make sure you have a meal worthy of Naples tonight. What would you like? Something that reminds you of home? Lucia's hands were shaking now, but she was smiling, actually smiling, and the sight of it hit Marco like a physical blow. La parmigiana, Lucia said, her voice stronger now, clearer. Come la faceva mia madre, con le melanzane sottili, non troppo olio. The parmigiana, like my mother made it, with thin eggplant, not too much oil. Elena nodded seriously, as if receiving sacred instructions. Sottili e leggere. Capisco perfettamente. E per iniziare, forse una caprese? I pomodori oggi sono bellissimi. Thin and light, I understand perfectly. And to start? Perhaps a caprese. The tomatoes today are beautiful. Si, Lucia said, and then she laughed. A sound so startling, so unexpected, that Marco actually flinched. Elena wrote quickly, then turned to Marco with that same genuine smile. Her eyes met his, and for a moment he forgot how to breathe. And for you, sir? Marco realized he was staring. He cleared his throat, pulling himself together. The osso buco, and a bottle of the Barolo. Excellent choice. She collected the menus, but before leaving, she placed a gentle hand on Lucia's shoulder. Signora, se ha bisogno di qualsiasi cosa, mi chiami. È un onore servirla. Signora, if you need anything, call for me. It's an honor to serve you. Lucia reached up and patted Elena's hand, her eyes wet and shining. Grazie, cara. Grazie mille. Thank you, dear. Thank you so much. As Elena walked away, Marco watched his mother transform before his eyes. The rigid posture softened, the empty stare filled with something that looked dangerously close to joy. Lucia turned to him, and her smile, God, that smile, nearly broke him. Marco, she said in Italian, her voice trembling with emotion. Did you hear her? She speaks like home, like your nonna used to speak to me. Marco swallowed hard, his throat tight. I heard, Mama. She's a good girl. You can see it in her eyes. Lucia's hands fluttered to her napkin, smoothing it with sudden energy. She understands. The language, yes, but more than that. She understands what it means. Marco didn't know what to say. For 10 years since his father died, Lucia had been a shell. The grief had consumed her, turned her into a silent, fading woman who existed but didn't live. He tried everything, doctors, therapists, trips back to Italy. Nothing worked. Nothing reached her. Until tonight. Until a waitress in a Boston restaurant spoke a few words in Italian and unlocked something Marco had believed was lost forever. He found himself watching the kitchen door, waiting for Elena to return. When she did, carrying their appetizers with the same graceful efficiency, Lucia immediately brightened again, leaning forward like a flower turning toward the sun. Perfetto, Lucia said as Elena set down the caprese. Thick slices of mozzarella layered with ripe tomatoes and fresh basil, drizzled with golden olive oil. Solo il meglio per lei, signora, Elena replied with a warm smile. Only the best for you, signora. As she turned to leave, Marco heard himself speak. How long have you worked here? Elena paused, meeting his eyes with that same directness that unsettled him. 3 months. I'm putting myself through culinary school. Culinary school, Marco repeated, studying her more carefully now. She wasn't just going through the motions of a job. There was purpose in every movement, knowledge in the way she described the dishes. The Institute of Culinary Arts, downtown, she said. I'm specializing in Italian cuisine, traditional techniques, regional variations. My grandmother taught me that food isn't just sustenance. It's memory, culture, love. I want to preserve that. Lucia made a soft sound of approval. Una ragazza saggia, una ragazza con un cuore italiano. A wise girl, a girl with an Italian heart. Elena's smile was radiant. Lei è troppo gentile, signora. My grandmother would have loved meeting you. She passed 3 years ago, and I miss speaking Italian with someone who understands it the way she did. Most people here, they know a few words, but it's not the same. It's not home, Lucia finished softly. It's not home. Esattamente, Elena said, her eyes glistening slightly. Exactly. Marco watched this exchange with growing fascination. He was a man who read people for a living, their intentions, their fears, their lies. It kept him alive in a world where trust was currency and betrayal was common. But Elena Rossi wasn't performing. She wasn't angling for tips or trying to impress. She was simply genuine. It was so rare in his world that he almost didn't recognize it. Enjoy your meal, Elena said softly, then disappeared back toward the kitchen. Lucia immediately turned to Marco, her eyes more alive than he'd seen them in years. Marco, that girl, she's special. She's a waitress, Mama. No. Lucia shook her head firmly. She's more than that. You can see it, the way she speaks, the way she listens. She has respect, dignity, and passion. Did you hear how she talked about food? About preserving tradition? Marco took a sip of water, trying to ignore the strange tightness in his chest. I heard. Your father would have liked her, Lucia said, and that observation hit harder than Marco expected. Giuseppe De Luca had been a man of contradictions, brutal when necessary, gentle with family, and fiercely protective of tradition. He'd built an empire on blood and loyalty, but he'd also taught Marco that respect was earned through actions, not words, and that honor meant something even in a world without rules. Papa's been gone a long time, Mama. But his wisdom isn't. Lucia reached across the table and gripped Marco's hand with surprising strength. Marco, when I heard that girl speak our language, not just the words but the feeling behind them, something in me woke up. Do you understand? I felt like a person again, not just a ghost waiting to die. The rawness in her voice made Marco's jaw clench. Mama? No, listen to me. Her grip tightened. For 10 years, I've been lost. Everything reminds me of your father, of what I lost, and I couldn't find my way back. But tonight, hearing Italian spoken with love, with understanding, it reminded me that I'm still alive, that there's still beauty in the world. Marco's throat burned. He wanted to tell her that he'd been trying to give her that for years, that he'd done everything he could think of to bring her back. But the truth was undeniable. A stranger had accomplished in 5 minutes what he couldn't do in a decade, and that stranger was currently bringing their entrees. Ecco qui, Elena said warmly, setting down the eggplant parmigiana in front of Lucia with careful reverence. Exactly as you requested. Thin, light, and made with love. Lucia stared at the dish, and tears spilled down her cheeks. È perfetto. È come se mi avesse riportato a casa. It's perfect. It's like you brought me home. Elena's expression softened with understanding. She crouched down beside Lucia's chair, speaking quietly in Italian. Signora, home isn't just a place. It's a feeling, a memory, a taste. And it's always with you here. She placed a gentle hand over her own heart. Your mother's love, your grandmother's recipes, they live in you. I'm just helping you remember. Lucia sobbed once, then reached out and cupped Elena's face with both hands. Che bella ragazza, che cuore gentile. What a beautiful girl. What a kind heart. Marco watched, transfixed, as his mother, this woman who'd been unreachable for so long, connected with a complete stranger on a level he'd never managed to achieve. And Elena didn't pull away or seem uncomfortable. She simply held Lucia's hands and smiled with such genuine warmth that Marco felt something crack open inside his chest. When Elena finally stood and set down his ossobuco, their eyes met, and Marco saw something flicker there, curiosity, maybe, or recognition, something that suggested she saw past the expensive suit and the careful control. "Buon appetito," she said softly, then left them to their meal. Lucia ate with more enthusiasm than Marco had seen in years, pausing between bites to close her eyes and smile, as if savoring not just the food but the memories it evoked. "Marco," she said in Italian, her voice thick with emotion, "you have to promise me something." "Anything, Mama." "Promise me we'll come back here, every week. I want to see her again. I want to talk with her." Marco's first instinct was to refuse. Getting attached to people, especially civilians, was dangerous in his world. But looking at his mother's face, seeing actual life in her eyes for the first time in a decade, he found himself nodding. "We'll come back." "Bene," Lucia smiled and squeezed his hand. "And Marco? Maybe you should talk to her too, really talk to her, not just as a customer." "Mama, a mother knows," Lucia said firmly. "I saw how you looked at her, and I saw how she looked at you." Marco wanted to argue, but the truth was, he couldn't stop thinking about the way Elena's eyes had met his. Direct, unafraid, honest. In his world, people either feared him or wanted something from him. Elena Rossi seemed to do neither, and that made her dangerous in an entirely different way. When Elena returned to clear their plates, Lucia immediately engaged her in conversation, asking about her studies, her family, her dreams. Elena answered with patience and genuine interest, sitting on the edge of an empty chair at their table, as if she had all the time in the world. Marco learned that Elena lived in a small apartment in Alston with 2 roommates, that she worked 3 jobs to pay for culinary school because her family couldn't afford to help, that her grandfather had been a chef in Naples, and her grandmother had brought his recipes to America like precious cargo. "Food is memory," Elena said, her eyes distant with recollection. "My nonna used to say that every dish tells a story. The way you season it, the care you take with each ingredient, it all matters. When you cook for someone, you're not just feeding their body, you're nourishing their soul." Lucia nodded vigorously. "Esattamente. This is what I tried to teach Marco when he was a boy, but he was always too busy running around, making trouble." Elena's eyes shifted to Marco with undisguised amusement. "Making trouble? I find that hard to believe." "You'd be surprised," Marco said dryly, and was rewarded with a genuine laugh. The sound did something strange to his pulse. "What kind of trouble?" Elena asked, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. Marco caught himself wanting to tell her, wanting to see that smile widen, to hear that laugh again. But Lucia jumped in first, launching into a story about 8-year-old Marco stealing cannoli from the kitchen and blaming it on the neighbor's dog. Elena laughed so hard she had to wipe her eyes, and Marco found himself smiling despite himself. "I was a growing boy," he said defensively. "I needed the calories." "You needed discipline," Lucia corrected, but she was grinning. "Your father, God rest him, he couldn't stay mad at you. You had those big eyes, and you'd look at him so innocently. And he'd let me off with a warning," Marco finished, the memory bittersweet. Elena's expression softened. "It sounds like you had a beautiful family." "We did," Lucia said quietly. "We do. Family is everything." The word hung in the air, heavy with meaning. In Marco's world, family meant loyalty, blood, and a code that transcended law. But sitting here, watching his mother smile and laugh with this young woman who'd appeared out of nowhere, he wondered if maybe family meant something simpler too. Maybe it meant connection, understanding, home. When the check came, Marco left twice the usual amount, but Elena barely glanced at it. She was too busy helping Lucia into her coat, speaking softly in Italian about a recipe for sfogliatelle that her grandmother used to make. "Next time you come, I'll bring you a sample," Elena promised. "I've been perfecting the technique." "I would love that," Lucia said, gripping both of Elena's hands. "Thank you, Cara. You've given me something precious tonight." Elena's eyes glistened. "The pleasure was mine, Signora. Truly." As they walked to the door, Marco found himself turning back. Elena was watching them leave, and when their eyes met, something passed between them. A recognition, a question, a a possibility. He nodded once, and she smiled, small and private. Then they were outside, the November air sharp against his skin, and Tony was holding open the car door. "That was a good dinner, yes?" Tony asked as they pulled away from the curb. "It was perfect," Lucia said from the back seat, her voice warm with contentment. "Marco, we're coming back next week, same time." "Yes, Mama. And you should talk to that girl, really talk to her." "Mama, I'm serious, Marco. When was the last time you smiled like you did tonight?" Marco stared out the window at the passing streets, at the familiar landscape of his territory, his kingdom, some might say. He knew every corner, every business, every player. He controlled more than most people would ever understand, but he couldn't remember the last time he'd smiled like he had tonight. "She's a civilian, Mama," he said quietly. "It's complicated." "Love is always complicated," Lucia replied, "but that doesn't mean it's not worth it." Marco didn't answer. He couldn't explain to his mother that in his world, caring about someone meant putting a target on their back. That the moment people knew Elena Rossi mattered to Marco De Luca, she would become leverage, a weakness to exploit. He'd seen it happen before. He'd lost people before. He wouldn't let that happen again. But all through the drive home, and later as he stood in his penthouse overlooking the Boston skyline, Marco couldn't stop thinking about the way Elena's eyes had lit up when she talked about food, about tradition, about preserving something beautiful in a world that often felt too harsh. He pulled out his phone and called Vincent, his second in command. "Boss? I need background on someone. Elena Rossi, works at Trattoria Bella Vista in the North End, student at the Institute of Culinary Arts." There was a pause. "Everything okay?" "Just do it, quietly. I want to know who she is." "You got it." Marco hung up and poured himself a whiskey, standing at the window as the city glittered below. He told himself he was just being careful, doing due diligence. Elena would be around his mother now, and he needed to know if there were any red flags, any connections that could cause problems. That's all this was. But when he closed his eyes, he saw her smile, heard her laugh, remembered the way she'd spoken Italian with his mother like it was the most natural thing in the world. And for the first time in years, Marco De Luca felt something he'd trained himself to suppress, something he'd learned was dangerous in his line of work. He felt curiosity, he felt interest. He felt the first faint stirrings of something that could become a problem far bigger than any rival family or business deal gone wrong. He felt the possibility of hope, and in his world, hope was the most dangerous thing of all. The following Thursday, Marco arrived at Trattoria Bella Vista 15 minutes early. Tony gave him a knowing look but said nothing as he opened the door. Lucia was practically vibrating with excitement. "Is she working tonight? Did you check?" "I didn't check, Mama." "Liar," she said affectionately. "You called ahead, I heard you." Marco had called ahead. He'd also had Vincent run that background check, which had come back frustratingly clean. Elena Rossi was exactly who she appeared to be. A hard-working student with no criminal connections, no debts to dangerous people, no skeletons in her closet, which somehow made her even more dangerous to him. Giovanni greeted them with his usual warmth. "Signor De Luca, Signora Lucia, welcome back. Your table is ready, and yes, Elena is working tonight." Lucia beamed. Marco tried to ignore the way his pulse quickened. They were barely seated when Elena appeared, carrying a covered dish and wearing a smile that made the entire restaurant seem brighter. "Buonasera, Signora Lucia," she said warmly, then turned to Marco. "Signor De Luca." "Just Marco," he heard himself say. "Please." Her eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded. "Marco, then. And I'm Elena." "I know," he said, then immediately regretted it because it sounded like he'd been thinking about her, which he had. Elena's smile turned knowing, but she didn't comment. Instead, she set the covered dish in front of Lucia with a flourish. "I promised you something special, Signora." Lucia lifted the cover and gasped. Inside were perfect golden sfogliatelle, the shell-shaped pastries gleaming with powdered sugar. "You made these?" Lucia breathed. "This morning, before my shift. I wanted you to have them fresh." Elena's voice was soft with pride. They're filled with ricotta and candied orange, just like my nonna used to make. Lucia picked one up with trembling hands, took a bite, and immediately tears began to stream down her face. Madonna Santa, she whispered. A perfetto, exactly like I remember, exactly like home. Elena's eyes filled too, and she quickly wiped them, laughing at herself. I'm sorry, I promised myself I wouldn't cry, but seeing your face… Come here, Lucia commanded, and when Elena leaned down, Lucia pulled her into a fierce hug. Grazie, tesoro. Grazie mille. You've given me such a gift. Marco watched, his chest tight, as these two women, one who'd raised him, one who was essentially a stranger, embraced like family. And for the first time, he allowed himself to really look at Elena, to see her not as a potential complication, but as a person. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. There was strength in the set of her shoulders, intelligence in her eyes, and a warmth in her smile that suggested she hadn't been hardened by life despite clearly working herself to exhaustion. She was everything his world usually destroyed. Okay, Elena said, pulling back and wiping her eyes with a laugh. Enough crying into the sfogliatelle. What can I get you for dinner? They ordered, and throughout the meal, Elena returned multiple times, not because she needed to, Marco suspected, but because Lucia kept calling her over to ask questions, to share stories, to laugh over shared memories of Italy. And each time, Elena sat on the edge of that empty chair and gave Lucia her complete attention, as if this elderly woman in a modest restaurant was the most important person in the world. Marco found himself growing protective, possessive even. He wanted to know more about her, wanted to understand how someone could be so genuinely kind in a city that usually ate kindness alive. When the dinner rush died down and the restaurant began to empty, Elena brought them espresso and a small plate of biscotti. On the house, she said. Considerate payment for the lovely conversation. You've been on your feet all night, Marco observed. Don't you want to sit down properly? Elena hesitated, glancing toward the kitchen, then smiled. Actually, yes, if you don't mind the company. We insist, Lucia said before Marco could speak, gesturing to the empty chair. Elena sank into it with visible relief, kicking off her practical black shoes under the table. Heaven, she murmured. 3 jobs, Marco said. It wasn't a question. Elena nodded. Here on Thursdays and weekends, a bakery Tuesday and Wednesday mornings, and prep work at the culinary school whenever they need it, plus classes 4 days a week. When do you sleep? Sleep is overrated, she said lightly, but Marco saw the exhaustion in the fine lines around her eyes. No, it isn't, he said firmly. You'll burn out. Can't afford to burn out, not yet. Elena sipped her espresso, and for a moment, her guard dropped. I'm so close. 1 more year and I'll have my degree. Then I can apply for positions at real restaurants, work my way up, maybe someday open my own place. What kind of place? Lucia asked, leaning forward with interest. Elena's entire face transformed, lighting up with passion. A real trattoria, not fancy. I don't want pretentious or trendy. I want the kind of place where families come for Sunday dinner, where the recipes are passed down through generations, where the food tastes like memory and home. I want to preserve the traditions that are disappearing, the old techniques, the regional specialties that nobody makes anymore because they're too time-consuming or not profitable enough. She spoke with such conviction, such fire, that Marco felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't just ambition. This was purpose. Calling. That's a beautiful dream, Lucia said softly. It's all I've ever wanted, Elena admitted. Since I was a little girl, watching my nonna in the kitchen. She'd let me help, rolling pasta, stirring sauce, learning the timing by feel instead of by recipe. She said cooking was like music. You could read all the sheet music in the world, but until you felt the rhythm in your soul, you'd never make real music. Wise woman, Marco said. The wisest. Elena's smile turned bittersweet. When she died, I promised her I'd keep the traditions alive, that I wouldn't let everything she taught me disappear into nothing. You honor her memory, Lucia said, reaching across to pat Elena's hand, and she would be so proud of you. They talked for another hour, about food, about Italy, about the North End, and how it had changed over the years. Marco mostly listened, content to watch his mother bloom under Elena's attention, to hear her laugh and argue and reminisce like she hadn't done in a decade. But he was also watching Elena, cataloging every expression, every gesture, every flash of passion when she talked about her work. When they finally stood to leave, Lucia hugged Elena again, holding on longer than necessary. "Same time next week?" Lucia asked hopefully. "I'll be here," Elena promised. Then her eyes shifted to Marco. "It was good to talk with you both, really good." "The pleasure was ours," Marco said, and meant it. As they walked to the car, Lucia was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Marco, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen." "I'm listening, Mama." "That girl, Elena, she's special. And I don't just mean because she makes good sfogliatelle or speaks beautiful Italian." Lucia stopped, turning to face him on the sidewalk. "She reminds me what it feels like to be alive, to care about something beyond grief and loss. And I think maybe she could do the same for you." Marco's jaw tightened. "Mama, I can't." "I know what you do, Marco." Lucia's voice was gentle but firm. "I'm not a fool. I know your business isn't all legal. I know there are dangers, complications, but I also know that your father lived in that world, and he still found room for love, for family, for beauty. He didn't let the darkness consume everything. Papa was stronger than me." "No," Lucia said fiercely. "He was just braver. He was brave enough to love me even though he knew it made him vulnerable. And you know what? It was worth every risk, every moment of fear. Because love, real love, it doesn't make you weak, Marco. It makes you human." Marco looked down at his mother, this tiny woman who'd survived losing the love of her life in 10 years of gray half-existence, and felt his throat burn. "I don't want to put her in danger." "Then don't," Lucia said simply. "But don't avoid her because you're afraid either. Fear is a poor foundation for any life decision." They drove home in contemplative silence, and Marco spent the rest of the night staring at the city lights, thinking about danger and desire, fear and hope. He thought about the way Elena smiled, the passion in her voice, the kindness in her eyes. And he thought about his father's words, spoken years ago. "The men who live in darkness need beauty more than anyone, Marco. We need reminders that there's still light in the world, still things worth protecting. Don't ever forget that." Marco hadn't forgotten. He just stopped believing he deserved it. But now, for the first time in years, he was beginning to wonder if maybe, just maybe, he'd been wrong. The Thursday dinners became ritual, then necessity, then something Marco looked forward to with an intensity that should have worried him more than it did. Week after week, he and Lucia returned to Trattoria Bella Vista. Week after week, Elena greeted them with that warm smile and flawless Italian that made his mother's eyes shine. And week after week, Marco found himself staying later, talking longer, learning more about the woman who'd somehow become the brightest point in his carefully controlled world. He learned that Elena had grown up in Providence, the youngest of 4 children in a family that could barely afford rent, let alone culinary school. That her father had worked construction until a fall from scaffolding left him disabled. That her mother cleaned houses 16 hours a day to keep the family afloat. "They didn't understand why I wanted to cook professionally," Elena told them one night, her hands wrapped around an espresso cup. "To them, cooking was just something you did to survive. They wanted me to be a nurse or a teacher, something stable, with benefits and a retirement plan." "But you chose this anyway," Marco said. "I had to." Elena's eyes grew distant. "My nonna, she used to say that some people are born with their calling written on their soul. You can ignore it, suppress it, try to be practical, but it never goes away. It just makes you hollow inside." Lucia nodded emphatically. She was right. You cannot deny your purpose without denying yourself. "Exactly," Elena said softly. "So I took out loans I'll probably be paying off until I'm 50, and I work myself half to death, and some days I'm so tired I want to cry. But when I'm in the kitchen, when my hands are in dough or I'm tasting a sauce and adjusting the seasoning, that's when I feel like myself. That's when I feel alive." Marco understood that feeling more than he could say. His own calling hadn't been chosen so much as inherited, a legacy of blood and loyalty that had shaped his life before he was old enough to question it. But he knew what it meant to feel alive in the work, to find purpose in the chaos. "Your family must be proud now," Lucia said, "seeing how hard you work, how talented you are. Elena's smile turned sad. They still don't really get it. They see me exhausted all the time, struggling to pay rent, and they think I'm wasting my life chasing an impossible dream. We don't talk much anymore. Something in Marco's chest tightened. That's their loss. Elena's eyes met his, surprised by the vehemence in his tone. Thank you. That means more than you know. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Marco didn't want to name. Then Giovanni appeared with their food, and the spell broke. But the awareness remained. It remained through dinner, through Lucia's stories, and Elena's laughter. It remained when Elena sat with them during her break, her shoes kicked off under the table, her exhaustion evident in the slope of her shoulders. It remained when Marco found himself noticing details he had no business noticing, the way she tucked a stray hair behind her ear, the small scar on her wrist from a kitchen burn, the fleck of gold in her brown eyes when the light hit them just right. "You're staring," Lucia said in Italian as they drove home that night. "I'm not." Liar. But she was smiling. "She likes you too, you know." "Mama, I see the way she looks at you when you're not paying attention, like she's trying to figure you out, like you're a puzzle she wants to solve." Marco gripped the steering wheel tighter. "That's dangerous. Living is dangerous, Marco. Loving is dangerous. That doesn't mean we should hide from it." But hiding was exactly what Marco was good at. He'd built his entire life on secrets and shadows, on controlling information and managing risks. Getting close to Elena meant exposing parts of himself he'd kept carefully locked away. It meant vulnerability. It meant risk. It meant the possibility of loss, and Marco had already lost too much. Yet he couldn't stay away. The next Thursday he arrived early again, and the Thursday after that. Each time he told himself it was for his mother, that he was just ensuring Lucia's happiness. But the truth was becoming harder to ignore. He wanted to see Elena. He wanted to hear her voice, watch her eyes light up when she talked about food, listen to her dreams and fears and hopes. He wanted to know everything about her, to understand what made her tick, to figure out how someone could maintain such genuine warmth in a cold, hard city. "You should ask her out," Vincent said one afternoon as they reviewed business in Marco's office. Marco looked up sharply. "Excuse me?" "The girl from the restaurant, Elena." Vincent leaned back in his chair, supremely unconcerned with Marco's dangerous tone. "Boss, I've known you 15 years. I've never seen you like this over a woman." "There's nothing to be like. She's just someone who makes you smile," Vincent interrupted. "Someone who makes you human instead of just the boss. Someone who's good for you." "Someone who could get hurt because of me," Marco said flatly. Vincent's expression sobered. "That's always the risk, but keeping everyone at arm's length doesn't make you safer, Marco. It just makes you lonely." The words hit harder than they should have. Marco dismissed Vincent with a wave and spent the rest of the afternoon trying to focus on business, on the legitimate deals that kept his operations running and the less legitimate ones that kept his power intact. But his mind kept wandering back to Thursday nights, to warm brown eyes and genuine laughter, to the way Elena's hands moved when she described cooking techniques, like conducting music only she could hear. That Thursday, Marco made a decision. When Elena brought their espresso and settled into her usual chair, he said, "Tell me about your final project." She blinked, surprised. "My what?" "Your culinary program. You said you're in your last year. There must be a final project, a thesis of some kind." Elena's face lit up exactly the way he'd anticipated. "There is. We have to design and execute a complete tasting menu, 6 courses that tell a cohesive story, demonstrate mastery of technique, and showcase our individual style." "What's your story?" Lucia asked, leaning forward with interest. "Migration," Elena said, her voice growing animated. "I want to tell the story of Italian immigration through food, starting with what people brought with them, the recipes, the traditions, the memories of home, then showing how those traditions adapted to American ingredients and tastes, and finally demonstrating how the cuisine evolved into something new, neither purely Italian nor purely American, but a beautiful hybrid that honors both." Marco found himself completely absorbed as she described each course, the antipasto representing what immigrants carried in their hearts, The primi showing adaptation and resourcefulness, the secondi celebrating the blending of cultures. It's ambitious, Elena admitted. My instructors think I'm crazy trying to tackle something so conceptual. But I need it to mean something, you know? I need it to matter. It will matter, Marco said with absolute certainty. Because you'll make it matter. Elena's eyes widened slightly at his intensity. You sound very sure. I am sure. I've watched you work. I've tasted your food. More importantly, I've seen your passion. Someone with that much dedication, that much heart, they don't fail. A flush crept up Elena's neck. Thank you. That's really kind. It's not kind, it's honest. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken things. Lucia cleared her throat delicately. When is this presentation? She asked. 3 months. End of February. Elena shook herself slightly, as if breaking from a trance. I'm already losing sleep over it. The tasting is in front of a panel of professional chefs, restaurant owners, potential employers. It could make or break my career before it even starts. Then we'll be there, Lucia announced. Elena laughed. It's not open to the public, signora. Only industry professionals and faculty. Then Marco will get us in, Lucia said with complete confidence. He's very good at getting access to places. Marco shot his mother a warning look, but she ignored it serenely. I appreciate the sentiment, Elena said, smiling. But honestly, I'd probably be too nervous with you watching. I'd burn something or drop a plate. You wouldn't, Marco said. You're too skilled for that. Elena's blush deepened. You don't know that. You've never seen me in a real kitchen. Then show me. The words were out before Marco could stop them. Elena stared at him, and Lucia's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. What? Elena said faintly. Marco should have backed down, should have made a joke, changed the subject, retreated to safer ground. Instead, he doubled down. Show me your kitchen, your school. Let me see where you work, where you create. I want to understand what you do. Elena seemed flustered, uncertain. It's not that interesting. Just a teaching kitchen with industrial equipment and stressed students. It's interesting to me. They stared at each other across the table, and Marco could feel Lucia's delighted smile even without looking at her. Okay, Elena said finally, softly. Okay. I have a practice session scheduled for Sunday afternoon. If you really want to watch someone make pasta for 3 hours, you're welcome to come. I'll be there. Me too, Lucia added quickly. Elena laughed, the tension breaking. All right then, Sunday at 2. I'll text you the address. She paused. Actually, I don't have your number. Marco pulled out his phone before he could overthink it. Give me yours. She rattled it off, and he typed it in, then sent her a message. Marco De Luca. Elena's phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She pulled it out, checked the message, and her smile turned shy. Got it. Good. Marco stood, helping Lucia with her coat. We'll see you Sunday. As they walked to the car, Lucia practically hummed with satisfaction. Well, that was forward of you. Don't start. I'm not starting anything. I'm simply observing that my son, who hasn't shown interest in a woman in years, just invited himself to watch her cook on a Sunday afternoon. I'm supporting her education, Marco said defensively. Lucia patted his arm. Keep telling yourself that, tesoro. Sunday arrived cold and bright, the February sun doing little to warm the sharp wind cutting through Boston's streets. Marco picked up Lucia and drove to the Institute of Culinary Arts, a converted warehouse in the South End that buzzed with creative energy. Elena met them at the entrance, dressed in chef's whites with her hair tucked under a cap. She looked professional, confident, completely in her element. Welcome to my second home, she said, gesturing them inside. Fair warning, it's loud, hot, and smells overwhelmingly of garlic. Sounds perfect, Lucia said. Elena led them through hallways lined with photos of distinguished alumni and into a massive teaching kitchen filled with stainless steel stations, professional ranges, and enough equipment to supply a small restaurant. My station's in the back, Elena said, weaving through clusters of students prepping ingredients. I've got it for 3 hours to practice my pasta course. Her station was organized with military precision. Ingredients measured and arranged in small bowls, tools laid out in exact order, a pasta machine clamped to the counter's edge. "You can sit here," Elena said, pulling over 2 stools to a spot where they'd be out of the way but could still see everything. "Just don't let Chef Bernard see you. He's a stickler about unauthorized visitors." "We'll be invisible," Marco promised. Elena grinned, then seemed to transform before his eyes. The moment she tied her apron and approached her station, everything else fell away. Her posture changed, her focus sharpened, and her hands moved with practiced grace as she began her work. Marco watched, mesmerized. She started with the dough, flour mounded on the steel surface, eggs cracked into the center, then her hands working the mixture with rhythmic confidence. There was something almost meditative about it, the way she kneaded and folded, checking the texture by touch rather than measurement. "In Italy," she said, her voice carrying despite the kitchen's noise, "every nonna has her own technique. Some say you need 1 egg per 100 grams of flour. Others insist you go by feel. Add flour until the dough tells you it's ready." "And what do you do?" Lucia asked. "I listen to the dough." Elena's smile was soft. "My nonna taught me that. She'd say the ingredients speak if you pay attention. Too dry, and the dough feels tight, resistant. Too wet, and it's sticky, desperate. But when it's right, it feels alive, like it wants to become something beautiful." She worked in silence for a while, and Marco found himself hypnotized by the motion of her hands, the concentration on her face, the way she occasionally closed her eyes as if sensing something invisible. When the dough was ready, she wrapped it in plastic and set it aside to rest. Then she started on the filling, ricotta, lemon zest, fresh herbs, seasoning adjusted with small tastes and thoughtful pauses. "This course represents the first generation," she explained as she worked. "The immigrants who brought their traditions but had to adapt to what they could find here. Ricotta was easier to get than some of the aged cheeses they left behind. Lemon was abundant, so they adjusted, improvised, made something new while holding on to the memory of home." "It's not just food," Marco said quietly. "It's history." Elena glanced at him, surprised and pleased. "Exactly. Every dish is a story. Every technique is a memory being preserved." She rolled out the pasta dough with a long wooden pin, her movement smooth and practiced. The sheets grew thinner and thinner, nearly translucent, and Lucia made a small sound of approval. "Perfetto," Lucia murmured, "just like my mother used to do." Elena beamed at the praise, then began cutting the pasta into squares, filling each one with a small spoonful of ricotta mixture and folding them into perfect triangular shapes. "Tortelloni," she said, "big enough to showcase the filling, but delicate enough to feel special." Marco couldn't take his eyes off her. There was something deeply attractive about watching someone operate at this level of skill, this depth of passion. Elena wasn't just cooking, she was creating, storytelling, preserving culture with her hands. When she finished the pasta, she set a large pot of water to boil and began preparing the sauce. Butter infused with sage, a splash of pasta water to create an emulsion, freshly grated Parmigiano Reggiano. The kitchen filled with the scent of herbs and butter, and Marco's stomach growled despite having eaten lunch. "Want to try one?" Elena asked, glancing at them with a mischievous smile. "You're supposed to be practicing," Marco said, but his tone was hopeful. "I'm also supposed to be testing for quality. That means I need taste testers." She carefully lowered several tortelloni into the boiling water, watching them with focused attention. "How do you know when they're done?" Lucia asked. "They'll float and the edges will look almost glossy. About 3 minutes for fresh pasta this thin." Elena lifted one out, examined it critically, then placed it back in the water for another 30 seconds. "Now." She plated 3 portions with careful precision, pasta arranged artfully, sauce drizzled just so, a final sprinkle of cheese and a fresh sage leaf for garnish. "Okay," she said, bringing the plates over. "Be honest. If something's off, I need to know." Marco accepted his plate, picked up the fork, and took a bite. The pasta was silk, the filling creamy and bright with lemon, the sage butter rich without being heavy. The flavors were clean, balanced, sophisticated, yet comforting. It tasted exactly like Elena had described, like memory and adaptation, tradition and innovation, all working in perfect harmony. "Oh my God," Lucia said, her eyes closing. "Elena, this is incredible." "Really?" Elena looked between them anxiously. "The seasoning's not too light? The pasta's not too thick?" "It's perfect," Marco said firmly. "Seriously, I've eaten at Michelin-starred restaurants that don't produce food this good." Elena's entire face lit up. "You're not just being nice?" "I'm never just nice," Marco said, which was true. "If this was bad, I'd tell you. This is extraordinary." She pressed her hands to her cheeks, laughing with relief and joy. Okay, good. That's one course down, 5 to go." They stayed for the full 3 hours, watching Elena work through 2 more courses. A seafood soup representing coastal Italian traditions adapted to New England ingredients, and a braised short rib that showcased the transition from peasant food to Italian-American comfort cuisine. Throughout it all, Marco noticed things. The way Elena tasted constantly, adjusting with confidence. The way she cleaned as she worked, maintaining order even in creative chaos. The way she talked to her ingredients, murmuring appreciatively over good olive oil or muttering at a lemon that wasn't quite ripe enough. She was brilliant, not just talented, but genuinely brilliant, with an instinct for flavor and technique that couldn't be taught. And she was wasting that brilliance working 3 jobs and exhausting herself to chase a dream that should have been handed to her on a silver platter. The unfairness of it made Marco's jaw clench. When Elena finally finished, she sagged against her station with visible exhaustion. Other students had long since left, and the kitchen had grown quiet. "You okay?" Marco asked, standing. "Just tired. I've been up since 4 working at the bakery." She smiled, but it was strained. "Worth it, though. Today was productive." "You need to eat," Lucia said firmly. "And rest. I'll grab something on the way home. I have a shift at the restaurant in 2 hours." "Elena," Marco said, his voice harder than intended. "When did you last have a day off?" She thought about it. "I don't know. Christmas, maybe?" "That was almost 2 months ago." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're exhausted." Marco gentled his tone with effort. "Come have dinner with us. Real dinner, not whatever you grab between shifts. Take 2 hours to sit down and eat like a human being." "I can't. I have work." "Call in sick," Marco said. Elena stared at him. "I can't just call in sick. They need me. They'll survive one night without you. You, on the other hand, won't survive if you keep running yourself into the ground." "Marco's right," Lucia added. "Tesoro, you can't pour from an empty cup. You need to take care of yourself." Elena looked between them, clearly torn. "I can't afford to lose a shift's worth of pay." Marco made a decision. "I'll cover it. Whatever you would have made tonight in wages and tips, I'll give you." "What? No, absolutely not." Elena's expression turned stubborn. "I don't take charity." "It's not charity. It's an investment in your health, so you can actually make it to your final presentation without collapsing." I said no. They glared at each other, and despite the tension, Marco felt a surge of respect. She had pride, boundaries, self-respect. She wasn't going to let him steamroll her just because he had money. "Compromise," Lucia interjected smoothly. "Elena, come to dinner with us. A few hours, good food, good company. No one pays anyone. Just friends sharing a meal." Elena hesitated, and Marco could see the exhaustion winning out over stubbornness. "Just dinner," she said finally. "But I'm paying for my own meal." "Deal," Marco lied, already planning to settle the bill before she could protest. They ended up at a small trattoria in the North End, not Bella Vista, somewhere quieter where they could talk without interruption. Elena had changed out of her chef's whites into jeans and a soft sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders for the first time Marco had seen. She looked younger like this, more vulnerable, beautiful in a way that made his chest ache. Over wine and food, neither he nor Elena had to cook. They talked, really talked. The kind of deep conversation that usually took months to build toward. Elena told them about growing up poor but loved, about watching her father struggle with pain and depression after his injury, about her mother's quiet strength and endless sacrifices. "I used to feel guilty," she admitted, swirling wine in her glass. "My parents worked so hard just to survive, and here I was, chasing this dream that seemed so frivolous, cooking, when there were bills to pay and real problems to solve. Cooking isn't frivolous, Lucia said fiercely. It's culture. It's love. It's how we nourish each other, body and soul. I know that now, but for a long time I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being selfish. Elena's eyes grew distant. My nonna was the one who convinced me otherwise. She said that preserving beauty in the world is never selfish. She said that in times of hardship, we need beauty more than ever. We need reminders that life can be more than just survival. Marco's throat tightened. His father had said almost exactly the same thing. Your nonna was wise, he said quietly. She was everything. Elena's smile turned sad. When she died, I thought about giving up, quitting school, getting a regular job, being practical like my parents wanted. But then I realized, if I quit, her legacy dies with me. All those recipes, all that knowledge, all that love she poured into teaching me, it would just disappear, and I couldn't let that happen. So you carry her forward, Marco said, in everything you cook, every technique you preserve, every student you'll teach someday. She lives on through you. Elena's eyes glistened. That's exactly it. That's exactly what I'm trying to do. They held each other's gaze across the table, and something shifted between them, something deep and fundamental, like recognizing a kindred spirit in an unexpected place. Lucia watched them both with satisfaction, then excused herself to use the restroom, leaving them alone. The silence that fell wasn't uncomfortable, but it was charged with awareness. Thank you, Elena said finally. For today. For coming to watch me cook, for this dinner, for understanding what I'm trying to do. It means more than you know. You don't have to thank me. I wanted to be there. Why? The question was gentle, curious. I mean, I'm just a waitress trying to get through school. She gestured vaguely. You're clearly successful, important. You don't have to spend your Sundays watching students make pasta. Marco considered his answer carefully. My mother was disappearing. For 10 years after my father died, she was just fading away. And then you spoke Italian to her and something woke up. You gave her back something I thought was lost forever. Marco, let me finish. He leaned forward, needing her to understand. You didn't just speak Italian. You listened to her. You saw her as a person, not just an old woman taking up a table. You honored her memories, her culture, her existence. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Elena's eyes were wide, shining in the candlelight. You made her feel alive again, Marco continued, his voice rough with emotion. And watching you do that, seeing your passion and kindness and brilliance, it reminded me that there's still beauty in the world, still things worth protecting. So no, you're not just anything. You're extraordinary. And spending time with you isn't an obligation. It's a privilege. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. I don't know what to say to that, Elena whispered. You don't have to say anything. I want to, though. I want you to know that these Thursday dinners, they've become the best part of my week. Your mother is wonderful, and you... She paused, seeming to gather courage. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know. Someone more closed off, I guess. More distant. But you listen when I talk about food. You ask real questions. You see me. Her voice dropped. That's rare, too. Marco's heart hammered against his ribs. He wanted to reach across the table, take her hand, close the distance between them. But Lucia was returning, and besides, he wasn't sure he had the right. His world was dangerous. His life was complicated. And Elena deserved simplicity, safety, someone who could love her without putting her at risk. But God, he wanted to try anyway. The evening wound down too quickly. Marco paid the bill while Elena was distracted, earning an exasperated but fond look when she realized what he'd done. You're impossible, she said. So I've been told. He drove them back to Elena's neighborhood, a slightly rough area of Alston where the buildings needed paint and the streetlights flickered. This is me, Elena said, pointing to a converted triple-decker with sagging steps. Marco's protective instincts flared. You walk home alone at night after your shifts? Usually. It's fine. It's not fine. He was already making mental notes. Better lighting, maybe one of his guys doing periodic sweeps. From now on, call me when you need a ride. Marco, I can't ask you to... You're not asking, I'm offering. His tone left no room for argument. Please, for my peace of mind. Elena studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay. Thank you. Lucia hugged her goodbye, whispering something in Italian that made Elena laugh. Then it was Marco's turn, and when she stepped into his arms, he caught the scent of her shampoo, felt the warmth of her against his chest, and had to force himself to let go. See you Thursday, she said softly. Thursday, he agreed. As they drove away, Lucia was quiet for several blocks. Then she said, You're in love with her. Marco's hands tightened on the wheel. Mama, don't deny it. I see it in your eyes. I hear it in your voice. You love her. He couldn't argue because she was right. Somewhere between Thursday dinners and Sunday pasta lessons, between watching Elena work and listening to her dreams, Marco had fallen completely, irrevocably in love. And it terrified him more than any threat he'd ever faced, because loving Elena meant risking her. And that was the one gamble Marco wasn't sure he could afford to take. The realization sat heavy in Marco's chest for days, a constant weight that made concentration difficult and sleep nearly impossible. He tried to focus on business, legitimate shipments that needed routing, territory disputes that required delicate negotiation, the endless machinery of his organization that demanded his attention. But his mind kept drifting back to warm brown eyes and flour-dusted hands, to the sound of Elena's laugh and the passion in her voice when she talked about preserving traditions. Vincent noticed, of course. Vincent noticed everything. You're distracted, he said during their Wednesday meeting, his tone carefully neutral. That's not like you. Marco looked up from the financial report spread across his desk. I'm fine. You've been staring at the same page for 10 minutes. That's not fine. That's dangerous. Vincent leaned forward. Talk to me, Marco. What's going on? For a long moment, Marco considered deflecting, maintaining the walls he'd built so carefully over the years, but Vincent had been with him since the beginning, had saved his life more than once, had earned the right to honesty. I think I'm in trouble, Marco said quietly. What kind of trouble? The Italians moving on our territory? The Feds sniffing around again? Worse. Marco set down his pen and met Vincent's eyes. The kind of trouble that makes you rethink everything you thought you knew about yourself. Understanding dawned on Vincent's face. The girl. Elena. I can't stop thinking about her. I can't... Marco ran a hand through his hair, frustrated by his own lack of control. I've never felt like this before. Not even close. That's not trouble, boss. That's life. It's trouble when my life could get her killed. Marco's voice turned hard. You know what happened to Polly's wife. You know what the Bratva did to Tommy's girlfriend when they wanted leverage? I've seen what happens when people in our world care about someone. I will not let that happen to Elena. Vincent was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. So what are you going to do? Walk away? I should. But you won't. I don't think I can. The admission felt like defeat and liberation all at once. And that makes me weak. That makes me a liability. No, Vincent said firmly. That makes you human. Marco, your father loved your mother desperately, and he never let that love make him weak. If anything, it made him stronger. It gave him something to fight for beyond power and money. My father was better at this than I am. Your father was just as scared as you are. I remember, I was there when you were born, remember? Giuseppe paced outside that hospital room like a caged animal, terrified that having a family would make him vulnerable. But you know what he told me afterward? Marco shook his head. He said that holding you for the first time, he finally understood what it meant to have something worth dying for, worth living for. That love didn't make him weak, it made him dangerous because now he had stakes that went beyond himself. The words settled into Marco's bones, resonating with something deep and fundamental. So what do I do? He asked quietly. You be careful. You be smart. And you decide if she's worth the risk. Vincent stood, preparing to leave. But Marco, from what I've seen, she's absolutely worth it. Just don't wait too long to tell her the truth about who you are. That kind of secret always comes out, and it's better if it comes from you. After Vincent left, Marco sat alone in his office, staring out at the city sprawling below. The truth. How did you tell someone like Elena, someone good and honest and pure, that the man she was growing close to controlled half the organized crime in Boston? That his money came from protection rackets and illegal gambling, from operations that existed in the shadows? She'd run. Of course she'd run. She'd look at him with horror instead of warmth, and that would be the end of it. Unless he changed things, unless he started transitioning the business into something legitimate, something that wouldn't make her look at him with disgust. The idea took root quickly, growing with the kind of intensity Marco usually reserved for business strategies. It wouldn't be easy. Organizations like his didn't go legitimate overnight. But it was possible. Other families had done it, slowly divesting from criminal operations and investing in legal businesses. It took time, planning, and careful maneuvering to avoid creating power vacuums that invited violence. But for Elena, it might be worth it. For the first time in his life, Marco had a reason to want something beyond power and control. Thursday arrived with cold rain that turned Boston's streets into rivers of gray slush. Marco picked up Lucia early, both of them more eager than usual for the warmth of Trattoria Bella Vista and the brighter warmth of Elena's presence. But when they arrived, something felt wrong. Elena was working, moving through her section with practiced efficiency, but the light was gone from her eyes. Her smiles were automatic, professional, lacking the genuine warmth that usually radiated from her. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her movements carried a heaviness that spoke of exhaustion deeper than physical tiredness. "Something's wrong," Lucia whispered as they settled at their table. Marco had already noticed. Every protective instinct he possessed was on high alert, screaming that something had hurt her. When Elena approached their table, she managed a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Buonasera, Signora Lucia, Marco." "The usual?" "What happened?" Marco asked, his voice coming out sharper than intended. "Nothing, just tired." But her hand trembled slightly as she wrote on her notepad. "Elena." Lucia's voice was gentle but firm. "Cara, talk to us. We can see you're upset." For a moment, Elena's composure cracked. Her eyes filled with tears. She blinked back quickly, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I got my evaluation back from my thesis advisor." She swallowed hard. "He said my concept is too ambitious, that I'm trying to do too much. He wants me to simplify the menu, make it more conventional, more marketable." "But that defeats the entire purpose," Marco said, anger rising in his chest. "I know. I tried to explain that the complexity is the point, that the story requires all 6 courses to work together. But he said if I don't revise, he can't guarantee I'll pass." A single tear escaped, tracking down her cheek. "I've worked so hard on this. I've poured everything into it, and now I have to choose between my vision and my degree." Lucia made a sound of distress, reaching across the table to grasp Elena's hand. "That's not fair. Not fair at all." "Life isn't fair," Elena said, her voice breaking slightly. "I should know that by now." Marco felt rage building in his chest. Not the cold, calculated anger he used in business, but something hotter, more personal. Some academic bureaucrat who'd never worked 3 jobs or fought for a dream was trying to crush Elena's passion, to force her into a safe, marketable box that would kill everything unique about her vision. "What's his name?" Marco asked, his tone dangerous. Elena looked at him sharply. "Why?" "Because I want to know who's responsible for making you cry." "Marco, no. Whatever you're thinking, don't." Elena pulled her hand back, her expression shifting to something like alarm. "I appreciate that you're upset on my behalf, but this is my problem to solve. I don't need you to fix it." "I'm not trying to fix it. I'm trying to help." "By doing what? Intimidating my professor? That's not help. That's—" She stopped, seeming to catch herself. "Look, I need this job. I need to work. Can we please just do our normal dinner and pretend everything's okay?" She walked away before Marco could respond, leaving him and Lucia staring at each other across the table. "She's protecting you," Lucia said softly. "She doesn't want you involved because she's afraid you'll make things worse." "Or because she's afraid of what I might do," Marco said grimly. Throughout dinner, Marco watched Elena work, saw the exhaustion in every movement, the defeat in the slope of her shoulders. It was wrong. Everything about it was wrong. Someone with her talent, her passion, her dedication, she should be celebrated, encouraged, supported, not beaten down by small-minded academics who valued conformity over brilliance. When Elena brought their espresso, Marco made a decision. "Take your break," he said. "Sit with us." "I can't. We're busy tonight." "5 minutes," Marco interrupted. "Please." Something in his tone made her pause. She glanced around the dining room, then nodded slowly and sank into the empty chair. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Marco said, "Tell me about your advisor. Not his name. I respect that you don't want me involved. But tell me about him, about the situation." Elena sighed, her resistance crumbling. "Professor Bernard. He's been teaching at the Institute for 20 years. Very traditional, very French classical technique. He thinks Italian cuisine is too rustic, not refined enough for fine dining." "So he's a snob," Lucia said flatly. A ghost of a smile crossed Elena's face. "Basically, but he's also the head of the program, and his recommendation carries weight. If he says my thesis isn't good enough, other faculty will listen." "What about the other professors?" Marco asked. "Surely someone sees the value in what you're doing." "Chef Maria does. She's Italian, teaches regional cuisine. She loves my concept, but she's junior faculty, and Bernard outranks her." Elena rubbed her eyes tiredly. "I could fight it. I could insist on doing my original vision and hope the tasting panel sees past Bernard's critique. But if I'm wrong, if they agree with him, I fail. And I can't afford to fail. I have loans, obligations, a family counting on me to finish what I started." "So you compromise your vision to guarantee passing," Marco said, understanding the calculation even as he hated it. "I don't have a choice." "There's always a choice." "Not when you're poor." Elena's voice turned sharp, edged with frustration. "Not when failure means wasting years of work and going into debt with nothing to show for it. You don't understand what that's like, Marco. You can afford to take risks. I can't." The words hit harder than she probably intended. She was right. Marco had been born into privilege, had inherited wealth and power that gave him options most people never had. He'd never had to choose between his dreams and survival, but he could help her avoid that choice. "What if you didn't have to compromise?" he said carefully. Elena's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean? What if you had another option? Another way to showcase your work without needing Bernard's approval?" "Marco, hear me out." He leaned forward, his mind already working through possibilities. "You said the tasting is in front of industry professionals, restaurant owners, chefs, potential employers. What if you had someone willing to back you independently? Someone who believed in your vision enough to invest in it?" "You," Elena said flatly. "You're talking about yourself." "I know people. I could make calls, get the right people to your tasting. People who appreciate innovation, who value tradition and storytelling in food. People who could offer you opportunities regardless of what Bernard thinks." "No." Elena stood abruptly. "Absolutely not." "No, Marco. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I won't be bought. I won't owe my success to connections or favors or whatever this is." Her voice shook with emotion. "I need to earn this. On my own terms, with my own work. Otherwise, it doesn't mean anything." She walked away, leaving Marco staring after her with a mixture of frustration and admiration. "She has pride," Lucia observed, "like someone else I know." "This is different. She's sacrificing her dreams because of pride." "No, she's protecting her integrity. There's a difference." Lucia covered his hand with hers. "Marco, you can't fix this for her. She has to find her own way. Even if it means watching her settle for less than she deserves? Even then. Because the moment you take that choice away from her, you stop seeing her as an equal. You make her a project, someone to rescue. Is that really what you want?" Marco slumped back in his chair, torn between his desire to help and his growing understanding that Elena needed to fight this battle herself. But that didn't mean he couldn't work behind the scenes. Over the next 2 weeks, Marco made quiet inquiries. He learned that Professor Bernard had a reputation for crushing students who didn't conform to his vision. that several talented chefs had left the program because of his rigid approach. He also learned that the Institute's board of directors had been discussing the need for fresh perspectives in the faculty, that Bernard's methods were increasingly seen as outdated. Information was power, and Marco knew how to use it. He didn't threaten Bernard, didn't lean on him or anyone else at the Institute. Instead, he had Vincent make a generous anonymous donation to the school's scholarship fund, earmarked specifically for students pursuing innovative approaches to traditional cuisine. He arranged for several respected Italian chefs, people he'd grown up around, whose families had known his family, to be invited to the final tasting event as guest judges. He laid groundwork, created opportunities, but left the execution entirely to Elena. Because Lucia was right. Elena needed to succeed on her own terms. During those 2 weeks, the Thursday dinners continued, but something had shifted. Elena was quieter, more withdrawn. She still spoke warmly to Lucia, still sat with them during her breaks, but the easy warmth between her and Marco had cooled into careful politeness. She was pulling away, and Marco understood why. He'd overstepped, made her feel like a problem to solve rather than a person to respect. The realization sat heavy in his chest, a reminder that good intentions didn't matter if they trampled someone's autonomy. On the third Thursday, Elena looked even more exhausted than before. She'd revised her thesis menu, compromising her vision to meet Bernard's demands, and the defeat in her eyes when she described it made Marco's hands clench under the table. "It's safe now," she said dully. "Conventional. Bernard approved it this morning. I'll pass, graduate, get my degree. That's what matters, right?" "Is it?" Marco asked quietly. Elena's eyes flashed. "It has to be. Because the alternative is throwing away everything I've worked for on principle, and I can't afford principles." "Everyone can afford principles. The question is whether you can afford to abandon them." "Easy for you to say." She stood, her professional mask slipping to show raw hurt underneath. "You know what, Marco? I really don't need a lecture right now. I need to work." She left, and this time when Lucia reached for his hand, Marco pulled away. "I'm making it worse," he said. "You're challenging her," Lucia corrected. "That's different. She's angry because you're right, and she knows it. Maybe I should back off, give her space. Or maybe you should be honest with her, really honest, about who you are and why you understand what it means to choose between integrity and safety." Marco looked at his mother sharply. "I can't tell her about the business. Not the details, but the truth. That you've spent your life balancing what's right against what's necessary. That you understand compromise and sacrifice. That you see her clearly, not as some perfect angel, but as a person fighting her own battles." Lucia's expression was fierce. "She needs to know you see her, Marco. All of her, including the parts she's not proud of." The words resonated, but Marco wasn't sure he had the courage to follow through. Being vulnerable meant risking rejection, and he'd built his entire life around avoiding that kind of weakness. But as he watched Elena move through the restaurant with mechanical efficiency, as he saw the light dying in her eyes day by day, Marco realized that his fear of rejection was selfish. What Elena needed wasn't his protection or his solutions. She needed his honesty. She needed to know she wasn't alone. The next Sunday, Marco showed up at Elena's apartment unannounced. It was a calculated risk. She could slam the door in his face, could tell him to leave her alone, but he was willing to take that chance. She answered on the third knock, wearing sweatpants and an oversized sweater, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. Surprise flickered across her face, followed by wariness. "Marco, what are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you, really talk to you, not across a restaurant table with your professional mask on." She hesitated, then stepped back to let him in. The apartment was small, cramped, shared with two roommates who thankfully seemed to be out. But it was clean, organized, with herbs growing in pots on the windowsill and the scent of fresh bread lingering in the air. "Did you bake?" Marco asked. "Couldn't sleep. I bake when I'm stressed." Elena gestured to the small kitchen table. "Sit, I'll make coffee." They moved around each other carefully, the air thick with unspoken tension. When they were finally settled with steaming mugs, Elena looked at him expectantly. "So, talk." Marco took a breath, then dove in. "I owe you an apology." When you told me about your thesis advisor, my first instinct was to fix it, to use my connections, my resources, my power to solve your problem. And that was wrong. Okay, Elena said cautiously. I wasn't respecting your agency. I was treating you like something broken that needed saving, and you're not broken. You're brilliant and strong and fighting battles I can't even imagine. He met her eyes steadily. I'm sorry for making you feel like I didn't see that. Some of the tension left Elena's shoulders. Thank you. That actually means a lot. But I also need you to understand something. Marco set down his coffee, choosing his next words carefully. My whole life, I've had power. I've had resources and connections and the ability to make things happen. And I've used that power to protect the people I care about, to solve problems, to control outcomes. It's what I do. It's who I am. I understand that. Let me finish. He held up a hand. For the first time, I've met someone who doesn't want me to use that power on her behalf. Someone who values her independence more than she values easy solutions. And it's driving me crazy, Elena, because I can see you struggling, see you compromising yourself, and every instinct I have screams to intervene. But you can't, Elena said softly. I know I can't. I know that helping you would actually hurt you, would take away the satisfaction of succeeding on your own terms. I understand that intellectually. He leaned forward, letting her see the raw emotion in his eyes. But it doesn't make it easier to watch. Because I care about you, Elena, more than I probably should, more than is smart or safe. And caring about you means wanting your happiness even when I can't be the one to give it to you. Silence fell between them, heavy and charged. Elena stared at him, her expression unreadable. You care about me, she repeated finally. Yes. More than you probably should. Yes. What does that mean, Marco? What exactly are you saying? This was it. The moment of truth, the vulnerability he'd been avoiding. Marco could deflect, could retreat to safer ground, or he could be brave. It means that Thursday dinners have become the highlight of my week. It means I think about you constantly, when I'm working, when I'm trying to sleep, every moment I'm not with you. It means watching you light up when you talk about food makes me believe in beauty again. His voice roughened. It means I'm falling in love with you, and it terrifies me because I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to care about someone without trying to control everything around them. Elena's breath caught. Marco. You don't have to say anything. I'm not asking for a response or a declaration. I just needed you to know that you're not alone in this. Whatever you're fighting, whatever you're going through, you have someone in your corner who sees you, who believes in you, who thinks you're extraordinary exactly as you are. Tears spilled down Elena's cheeks. She wiped them away impatiently, laughing through the emotion. You really are impossible. So I've been told. I'm a mess, Marco. I'm exhausted and stressed, and I've compromised my vision because I'm too scared to take a real risk. I'm not extraordinary. I'm barely holding it together. You're human. That doesn't make you less extraordinary. It makes you real. Marco reached across the table, palm up, offering. And being scared doesn't make you weak. Taking the safe path when you have bills to pay and obligations to meet, that's not compromise. That's survival. I respect that. Elena stared at his hand for a long moment, then slowly placed hers in it. Her fingers were trembling, but her grip was strong. I care about you too, she whispered. That's why I got so upset when you offered to help. Because part of me wanted to say yes, wanted to take the easy path, and let you fix everything. And that scared me more than anything Bernard could say. Why? Because I'm afraid of losing myself. Of becoming someone who depends on you, who lets you carry all the weight. My mother did that with my father, and when he got hurt, she had to become someone entirely different just to survive. I saw what dependency cost her. Elena's voice shook. I need to know I can stand on my own. I need to prove it to myself. I understand, Marco said, and he did. And I'm not asking you to depend on me. I'm just asking you to let me be there. Not to solve your problems, but to witness your strength, to celebrate your victories and sit with you through the hard parts. That's all you want? That's everything I want. Elena laughed again, this time with less tears and more genuine amusement. You really are different from what I expected. What did you expect? Someone more, I don't know. Controlling, maybe. You have this intensity about you, this presence that suggests you're used to getting your way. But then you sit in a restaurant for hours listening to your mother and a waitress talk about recipes, and you show up to watch me make pasta, and you respect my boundaries even when it clearly frustrates you. She squeezed his hand. You're complicated, Marco DeLuca. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'm not sure yet, she said honestly. But I'd like to find out. Hope bloomed in Marco's chest, fragile and precious. Yeah? Yeah, but slowly, okay? I need time to figure out my thesis situation, to get through finals, to actually graduate. And I need to do it without worrying about how it affects us, or what you think, or whether I'm disappointing you. You could never disappoint me. You say that now. But what if I take the safe route? What if I do the conventional menu and graduate with a degree that represents everything you said I shouldn't compromise? Marco considered this carefully. Then I'll be proud of you for making a difficult choice and seeing it through. Elena, I don't love you because of your thesis menu. I love you because of who you are. Someone who works 3 jobs to chase a dream, who speaks Italian to lonely old women, who finds beauty in tradition and meaning in food. Whether you do 6 innovative courses or 3 conventional ones doesn't change any of that. You love me, Elena said, her voice barely audible. Marco froze, realizing what he'd just said. There was no taking it back now, no pretending it was casual or premature. Yes, he said simply. I love you. Tears welled in Elena's eyes again, but she was smiling. That's terrifying. Tell me about it. I'm not ready to say it back, not yet. Not because I don't feel something, but because I need to be sure. I need to know who you really are, beyond the man who has dinner with his mother and makes generous gestures. There are things about you that don't quite add up, Marco. Questions I've been too polite to ask. His heart stuttered. What kind of questions? The kind about why everyone in the North End treats you like royalty. Why you have a driver and expensive suits and the kind of presence that makes people nervous. Why you talk about power and resources like you control half the city. Elena's gaze was direct, unflinching. I'm not stupid, Marco. I know there's more to your life than you've told me. And before this goes any further, I need to know what that is. This was it. The moment Vincent had warned him about, the moment he'd been dreading. Marco could lie, could deflect, could buy himself more time. But Elena deserved honesty, even if it cost him everything. You're right, he said quietly. There are things I haven't told you, things about my business, my family, the world I come from, and you deserve to know all of it before you decide whether you want me in your life. So tell me. Marco took a deep breath, feeling like he was standing on the edge of a cliff. Once he stepped off, there was no going back. My family has been in Boston for 4 generations. My great-grandfather came from Sicily and built a legitimate import business, but he also built other operations, protection, gambling, enforcement. He created a network that still exists today, stronger and more organized than ever. Elena's face paled slightly, but she didn't pull her hand away. When my father died, I inherited everything, the legitimate businesses and the less legitimate ones. I control operations across the city. Not drugs, never drugs. That's a line we don't cross, but other things. Things that exist in gray areas and shadows. He met her eyes steadily. I'm not a villain, Elena. I have rules, principles, lines I won't cross. But I'm also not a civilian. I'm not safe, or simple, or easy. The silence stretched so long that Marco thought he might shatter from the tension. Then Elena said, Are you dangerous? To some people, yes. Are you dangerous to me? Never. Not directly. But being close to me could put you at risk. My enemies could use you to get to me. That's why I've been so careful, so protective. That's why I wanted to help with Bernard, because I'm used to eliminating threats, and he felt like a threat to you. Elena pulled her hand back and Marco's heart sank. This was it, the moment she walked away. But instead of standing, she leaned back in her chair, studying him with those intelligent eyes that saw too much. I need time to process this, she said finally. I understand. I'm not saying no, but I'm not saying yes either. I need to think about what this means, what I'm willing to risk, what kind of life I could have with someone like you. That's fair. It hurt. but it was fair. And Marco? She met his eyes again. Thank you for being honest. Finally. That took courage. He nodded, not trusting his voice. They sat in awkward silence for a few more minutes, then Marco stood. I should go. Let you think. Elena walked him to the door, and for a moment they stood facing each other in the cramped hallway. Thursday? She asked quietly. Relief flooded through him. Thursday. Bring your mother. I miss her. She misses you too. Elena reached out and squeezed his hand briefly. Whatever I decide, Marco, I want you to know, you showing up here today, being vulnerable, telling me the truth, that meant something. That meant everything. Then she closed the door, leaving Marco standing in the hallway with his heart in his throat and his future hanging in the balance. As he drove home through Boston's streets, his streets in many ways, Marco realized that for the first time in his life, he had no control over the outcome that mattered most. Elena would make her choice, and all he could do was wait and hope that love was enough to bridge the distance between their two very different worlds. The week that followed felt like the longest of Marco's life. He went through the motions of business, meetings with Vincent, negotiations with suppliers, the endless administrative work that kept his organization running. But his mind was elsewhere, caught in the uncertainty of Elena's silence. She hadn't called, hadn't texted, and Marco, who'd spent his entire adult life knowing exactly how to handle every situation, had no idea whether that silence meant she was thinking or whether she'd already decided to walk away. You're driving yourself crazy, Vincent observed on Wednesday afternoon as Marco stared at his phone for the third time in 10 minutes. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're checking your phone like a teenager waiting for prom date confirmation. Vincent leaned forward, his expression serious. Boss, whatever happens with Elena, you need to keep your head in the game. We've got the Moretti situation heating up, and I need you focused. The Moretti situation? Right. The family from Providence had been making noise about expanding into Boston territory, testing boundaries, seeing how far they could push. Normally, Marco would handle it with swift, decisive action, a clear message that his territory was not up for negotiation. But lately, he'd been wondering what the point was. What was he protecting, really? An empire built on violence and fear? A legacy that would die with him because he had no heir, no future, beyond maintaining power for power's sake? Set up a meeting with Moretti, Marco said abruptly. Tell him I want to talk. Vincent's eyebrows rose. Talk? Since when do we talk to people who disrespect our boundaries? Since I started thinking about the future. About what I want my life to look like in 5 years, 10 years. Marco met Vincent's eyes steadily. I meant what I said before, about going legitimate. I've been thinking about it seriously, running the numbers. It's possible, Vincent. Difficult, but possible. Because of her. Because of a lot of things. But yes, Elena is part of it. Marco stood, pacing to the window. I watched my father build this empire, and I watched it consume him. He died at 62 from a heart attack because the stress was killing him. My mother spent 10 years as a ghost because she couldn't imagine life without him. Is that what I want? To die young and leave nothing behind but money and territory? Your father left you, Vincent said quietly. That's not nothing. No, but I want to leave more than that. I want to leave something that matters, something clean, and I can't do that if I'm still operating in the shadows. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, I'll set up the Moretti meeting, but Marco, going legitimate doesn't happen overnight. You're talking years of careful transition, and in the meantime, you're still the boss. You still have responsibilities. I know, I'm not abandoning anything. I'm just starting to plan for a different future. Does Elena know that's what you're thinking about? No? Marco's chest tightened. I don't even know if she's going to give me a chance to tell her. Thursday arrived with bitter cold and the kind of gray sky that promised snow. Marco dressed carefully, trying not to think too hard about why he was choosing his clothes like they mattered, like Elena would notice or care what he wore. Lucia was already waiting when he picked her up, wrapped in her good coat and wearing the pearl earrings his father had given her on their anniversary. You look nice, Mama. So do you. She patted his cheek. Very handsome. Elena will appreciate the effort. She might not even talk to us. I told her the truth about the family business. She might have decided it's too much. Then she's smarter than I give her credit for, and she'll surprise you, Lucia said with infuriating confidence. That girl has steel in her spine. She's not going to run from something difficult. Marco wanted to believe that. He'd spent the entire week replaying their conversation, analyzing every word, every expression. Elena had been scared, yes, but she hadn't been disgusted. She hadn't looked at him like he was a monster. She'd looked at him like he was a complicated problem she was trying to solve. He could work with that. Trattoria Bella Vista was warm and bright when they arrived, the windows fogged from the heat inside. Giovanni greeted them with his usual respect, but there was something knowing in his smile as he led them to their table. "Elena's working tonight," he said, as if Marco hadn't already known, as if his heart wasn't hammering against his ribs at the confirmation. "She asked me to tell you she'll be with you in a moment." They settled at their usual table, and Lucia immediately reached across to grip Marco's hand. "Breathe, tesoro. Whatever happens, we'll handle it." Marco nodded, not trusting his voice. Then Elena appeared, and the world narrowed to just her. She looked tired still, shadows under her eyes, and a tightness around her mouth that spoke of stress and lost sleep. But when she met Marco's gaze, there was something different in her expression. Not the warmth he'd grown used to, but not rejection either. Something more complex, more thoughtful. "Buonasera, Signora Lucia," she said, her voice steady. "Marco." "Elena," he managed. "The usual?" "Please," she wrote on her notepad, but Marco could see her hand trembling slightly. "I'll put your order in. And when I take my break, I'd like to talk, if that's okay." "Of course," Lucia said before Marco could respond. "We're not going anywhere." Elena nodded and walked away, leaving Marco to stare after her. "She's going to give you a chance," Lucia said softly. "I can see it in her eyes. She's nervous, but she's here. That means something." The meal passed in a blur of anticipation. Marco barely tasted his food, too focused on watching Elena move through the restaurant, taking orders, delivering plates, maintaining her professional composure even though he could see the tension in her shoulders. Finally, nearly an hour later, Elena brought their espresso and sank into the empty chair with visible relief. "Long shift?" Lucia asked gently. "Long week," Elena corrected. She looked at Marco, then away, then back again, as if gathering courage. "I've been thinking about what you told me. A lot." Marco's heart rate spiked. And I'm terrified," she said honestly. "Everything you described, your world, your business, the risks, it goes against every instinct I have for self-preservation. Getting involved with you could ruin my life, could put me in danger, could cost me everything I've worked for." Marco felt something crack inside his chest. This was it. The rejection he'd been dreading. "But," Elena continued, holding up a hand to stop him from speaking, "I've also been thinking about what my life looks like without you in it. And that scares me too." Hope flickered, fragile but real. "I talked to my roommate Maria. She's studying psychology, thinks she knows everything about human behavior." Elena smiled faintly. "She said I'm addicted to struggle, that I'm so used to fighting for everything that I don't know how to accept good things when they're offered. She said I'm sabotaging myself by overthinking this." "What do you think?" Marco asked quietly. "I think she might be right. I think I've been so focused on doing everything alone, on proving I don't need help, that I've forgotten what it means to let someone in." Elena's eyes glistened. "You scare me, Marco. Your world scares me. But the way you look at me, the way you see me, that's something I've never had before. And I don't want to lose it because I'm too afraid to take a risk." Lucia made a small sound of approval, but Marco couldn't look away from Elena. "What are you saying?" he asked, needing to hear it clearly. "I'm saying I want to try. Not rushing into anything, not making promises I can't keep, but trying to see if we can build something real." Elena reached across the table, her hand palm up in offering. "But I need you to be honest with me, Marco. Always. If your world becomes dangerous, if being with you puts me at risk, I need to know. I need to be able to make informed choices." Marco took her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin against his, the slight tremor in her fingers. I promise. Complete honesty, even when it's hard. And I need you to respect my independence, my need to succeed on my own terms, to fight my own battles. I can do that. It'll drive me crazy sometimes, but I can do it. Elena laughed, the sound breaking through the tension. This is probably a terrible idea. Probably, Marco agreed. But some of the best things in life are terrible ideas. Is that your philosophy on business too? Sometimes. He squeezed her hand gently. Elena, I know this is complicated. I know I come with baggage and risks and a whole world you never asked to be part of. But I want you to know, I'm working on changing things, making my operations more legitimate, transitioning away from the darker aspects of the business. It won't happen overnight, but I'm committed to it. Elena's eyes widened. Because of me? Because of a lot of reasons. But yes, you're a big part of it. You make me want to be someone worthy of you, someone who builds things instead of just protecting territory, someone who leaves a legacy that matters. Tears spilled down Elena's cheeks, and she wiped them away with her free hand, laughing at herself. You can't just say things like that, Marco. I'm at work. I'm supposed to be professional. Sorry, he said, though he wasn't sorry at all. Lucia cleared her throat delicately. I'm going to use the restroom. Take your time, you two. After she left, Elena and Marco sat in charged silence, hands still clasped across the table. I'm still doing my conventional thesis menu, Elena said finally. I decided this morning. I know you think I should fight, but I need to be practical. I need to graduate. Okay, Marco said simply. She blinked, surprised. Okay? That's it? No lecture about integrity or not compromising my vision? It's your choice, Elena. I might not agree with it, but I respect it. You're the one who has to live with the consequences, not me. What if I regret it? Then you'll know better for next time. That's how we learn. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. But for what it's worth, I don't think you're capable of doing anything mediocre, even if you're trying to play it safe. Your passion shows through in everything you do. Elena's breath caught. You have too much faith in me. I have exactly the right amount of faith in you. They sat like that for another few minutes, just holding hands and looking at each other, until Giovanni appeared to remind Elena she had other tables to attend. Right, work. I have to work. She stood reluctantly. Will you stay until my shift ends? It's another hour. We'll stay, Marco promised. After Elena left, Lucia returned with a knowing smile. So we're going to try, slowly, carefully, but we're going to try. Good. Lucia's smile widened. That girl is going to change your life, Marco. I can feel it. She already has, Mama. She already has. The next few weeks fell into a new rhythm. Thursday dinners continued, but now Marco also picked Elena up after her late shifts, driving her home through dark streets and insisting on walking her to her door. They talked during those drives, about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their days, learning each other's rhythms. Elena told him about her classes, about the stress of finals, and the constant exhaustion of balancing 3 jobs. Marco told her about the legitimate side of his business, about the real estate investments and import companies that formed the foundation of his wealth. They didn't talk about the darker parts of his world, and Marco was grateful for the reprieve. There would be time for that later, when she was ready to hear more. He also started spending more time with Vincent, working through the logistics of transitioning the family business. It was complex, requiring careful negotiation with other families, strategic divestment from certain operations, and significant legal restructuring. This is going to take years, Vincent warned, and it's going to cost you power. Some of your guys won't like it, won't understand why you're walking away from profitable operations. Then they can leave. I'm not forcing anyone to stay. Marco signed off on another document, another step in the long process. But I'm done living in the shadows. I want a life that doesn't require constant vigilance, that doesn't put the people I love at risk. Your father would be proud, Vincent said quietly, or maybe horrified. Hard to say. He'd understand. He always said family came first, and Elena... Marco paused. She's becoming family, Vincent. I can feel it. Then let's make sure the world you're building is worthy of her. The meeting with Moretti happened on a cold February morning in a neutral restaurant in Providence. Marco brought Vincent and two other trusted men, enough to show strength but not enough to suggest aggression. Carlo Moretti was younger than Marco expected, maybe 35, with the kind of hungry eyes that reminded Marco of himself 10 years ago. "De Luca," Moretti said, extending a hand across the table. "I appreciate you agreeing to meet." "Let's skip the pleasantries," Marco said, settling into his chair. "You've been testing my boundaries, seeing how far you can push into Boston territory. I'm here to tell you that stops now." Moretti's smile was sharp. "Or what? You'll go to war over a few gambling operations?" "No. I'm going to offer you a deal." Marco leaned forward. "I'm in the process of transitioning my operations toward legitimate business. That means I'll be divesting from certain activities over the next few years. You want Boston territory? Fine. But we do it on my timeline, with proper compensation and without bloodshed." Moretti's eyes narrowed. "You're serious. You're actually walking away." "From some things, yes. I'm keeping the real estate, the import business, the legitimate operations. But gambling, protection, enforcement, I'm out. Eventually." "Why?" Marco thought about Elena, about Thursday dinners, and the way her eyes lit up when she talked about preserving traditions, about the future he wanted to build, one that didn't require violence and fear. "Because I have better things to do with my life than fight over territory, because I'm tired of looking over my shoulder, because I want to build something that lasts beyond me." Moretti studied him for a long moment. "Your father would have fought me. My father's dead, and I'm not him." Marco met his eyes steadily. "Do we have a deal or not?" They spent the next 2 hours hammering out the framework, a gradual transition over 3 years, with Marco maintaining control of key operations until he was ready to divest, and Moretti paying fair market value for what he acquired. It wasn't a perfect deal, but it was a start. A first step toward the life Marco wanted. When he returned to Boston that evening, he drove straight to Elena's apartment. She answered the door in her chef's whites, clearly having just gotten home from the Institute. "Marco, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine. Better than fine." He couldn't keep the smile off his face. "I just wanted to see you. Is that okay?" Elena's expression softened. "It's more than okay. Come in. I was just about to make dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta and whatever's in the fridge. Sounds perfect." He watched her cook in her tiny kitchen, moving with the same grace and confidence she showed in the Institute's professional kitchen. She talked as she worked, describing a technique Chef Maria had demonstrated that morning, and Marco found himself completely content just listening. This was what he wanted. Simple moments, domestic peace, the quiet joy of being with someone who made him feel human instead of just powerful. "Taste this," Elena said, holding out a spoon of sauce. Marco stepped closer, accepting the offering. The sauce was bright with tomatoes and basil, perfectly seasoned, complex yet simple. "It's delicious," he said honestly. "It's my nonna's recipe. One of the first things she taught me." Elena stirred the pot thoughtfully. "I'm thinking about using a variation of it in my thesis menu. Even though I'm playing it safe overall, I can still honor her in small ways." "That's a good compromise." "Is it? Or am I just trying to have it both ways?" Marco moved behind her, his hands settling gently on her shoulders. "Elena, stop second-guessing yourself. You made a choice for practical reasons, and now you're finding ways to maintain your integrity within those constraints. That's not having it both ways. That's being smart." She leaned back against him, and Marco wrapped his arms around her waist, holding her close. They stood like that for a long moment, the sauce simmering on the stove, the kitchen warm with steam and the scent of cooking. "I'm scared about the tasting," Elena admitted quietly. "It's in 2 weeks, and I keep having nightmares about everything going wrong." "It won't go wrong. You're too prepared, too talented. You don't know that." "Yes, I do. I've watched you work, Elena. I've seen your focus, your skill, your passion. You're going to walk into that tasting and blow everyone away, conventional menu or not." She turned in his arms, looking up at him with vulnerable eyes. "What if I don't, though?" What if Bernard was right and I'm not good enough? Then every chef on that panel is an idiot, and you'll prove them all wrong when you open your own restaurant someday. Marco cupped her face gently. But that won't happen. You're going to succeed because you're brilliant, and because you've worked harder than anyone I've ever met. Elena's eyes filled with tears. How do you do that? How do you make me believe in myself? I just tell you the truth, the rest is all you. She kissed him then, rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his with a tenderness that made Marco's heart stutter. It was their first real kiss, soft and sweet and tasting of tomato sauce and hope. When they pulled apart, Elena was smiling through her tears. Stay for dinner, please. Let me cook for you, just us, no restaurants or crowds or professional masks. I'd love that. They ate at her small kitchen table, plates of pasta and fresh bread, glasses of cheap wine that tasted perfect anyway. Elena told him stories about her grandmother, about learning to cook in a kitchen barely bigger than this one, about the recipes passed down through generations. Marco found himself sharing memories too, his father teaching him the business, his mother's Sunday dinners when he was young, the weight of legacy and expectation. Do you ever wish you could walk away from it all? Elena asked. Start over somewhere new, be someone different. Sometimes. But then I remember that running away doesn't change who you are. It just changes where you are. Marco set down his wine glass. I don't want to be someone different, Elena. I want to be someone better. And that means facing who I am, accepting it, and choosing to build something worthwhile with the power I have. That's very philosophical for a crime boss. Former crime boss, he corrected with a slight smile, or at least transitioning crime boss. Give me a few years. Elena laughed and the sound filled the small apartment with warmth. I can't believe this is my life now. Having dinner with a man who's negotiating his way out of organized crime while I stress about culinary school finals. Stranger things have happened. Name one. Marco thought about it. My mother finding joy again after 10 years of grief because a waitress spoke Italian to her. That seems pretty strange. That's not strange. That's beautiful. So is this, Marco said, gesturing between them. You and me, two people from completely different worlds, finding each other and deciding to try anyway. That's beautiful too. Elena reached across the table and took his hand. Yeah, it really is. They cleaned up together, moving around each other in the cramped kitchen with easy familiarity, and Marco realized this felt more like home than his expensive penthouse ever had. When it was time to leave, Elena walked him to the door, but she didn't let go of his hand. Thank you for coming over, for understanding about the thesis menu, for being patient with me while I figure all this out. You don't have to thank me for caring about you, Elena. That's not a favor. It's a privilege. She kissed him again, longer this time, with more certainty, and when she pulled back, her smile was radiant. 2 weeks until the tasting. Will you be there? I know I said I'd be too nervous, but I've changed my mind. I want you there, you and Lucia both. Marco's heart swelled. We wouldn't miss it for anything. Good, because I'm going to need all the support I can get. You'll have it, always. As Marco drove home through Boston's streets, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Genuine happiness, untainted by stress or obligation or the constant weight of responsibility. Elena was giving him a chance, a real chance at something beyond power and control, something that felt like a future worth building. And he was going to do everything in his power to be worthy of that gift. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Elena worked herself to exhaustion, practicing her menu dozens of times, perfecting every element until she could execute each dish blindfolded. Marco watched her push herself to the limit, and though every protective instinct screamed to make her rest, he respected her process. This was how she fought her battles, with relentless dedication and refusal to compromise on execution, even if she'd compromised on concept. The night before the tasting, Marco picked her up from her final practice session at the Institute. She looked completely drained, dark circles under her eyes, hands trembling with fatigue. Come home with me, he said gently. Marco, I can't. I need to be at the Institute at 6 tomorrow morning. Then I'll make sure you're there at 6. But tonight, you're going to rest in a real bed, eat a real meal, and let someone take care of you for once." Elena looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion won out. "Okay." Marco's penthouse was everything her apartment wasn't: spacious, luxurious, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. But he didn't overwhelm her with it. Instead, he led her to the guest room, laid out comfortable clothes for her to change into, and ordered food from her favorite Italian restaurant. They ate on the couch, Elena curled against his side, both of them quiet and comfortable in the silence. "I'm terrified," she admitted finally. "Tomorrow is everything. If I fail, you won't fail. But if I do, then you'll learn from it and try again. But Elena, you won't fail. I've seen your food. I've watched you work. You're ready." She turned to look up at him, her eyes searching his face. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I know you. Because I've seen you fight for everything you have. Because brilliance doesn't disappear just because you're being cautious." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Tomorrow, you're going to walk into that tasting and show every single person in that room what real Italian cooking means. Not fusion, not trendy, not trying to be something it's not. Just honest, beautiful food made with skill and love. And they're going to see what I see." "Which is?" "Someone extraordinary." Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I love you." The words hung in the air between them, precious and perfect. Marco's breath caught. "Say that again." "I love you, Marco De Luca. I probably shouldn't, and it's probably going to complicate everything, but I do. I love you." Marco kissed her then, pouring everything he felt into it, all the hope and fear and desperate tenderness that had been building for months. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I love you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I thought I was capable of loving anyone." They held each other on the couch as the city lights glittered outside, and for the first time in longer than Marco could remember, he felt completely at peace. Tomorrow, Elena would face her biggest challenge, and he would be there, supporting her from the audience, believing in her even when she struggled to believe in herself. Because that's what love meant. Not fixing someone's problems, but standing beside them while they fought their own battles. And Marco was finally learning how to do exactly that. Elena woke before dawn to find Marco already awake, standing by the window with a cup of coffee, silhouetted against the gradually lightening sky. She watched him for a moment, this complicated man who'd somehow become essential to her life, and felt her heart clench with a mixture of love and terror about what the day would bring. "You should still be sleeping," he said without turning around. "How did you know I was awake?" "Your breathing changed." He turned then, and even in the dim light she could see the concern in his eyes. "How are you feeling?" "Like I might throw up. Is that normal?" "Completely normal." Marco crossed to her, setting down his coffee to take her hands. "Elena, I need you to listen to me. Today is going to be difficult, and you're going to doubt yourself at least a dozen times. But I need you to remember something. You've already done the hard part. The work is done. The practice is done. Today is just showing people what you're capable of. What if they don't see it? Then they're blind, but they won't be, because you're going to be magnificent." He kissed her forehead gently. "Now come on. I made breakfast. You need to eat." They sat together at his kitchen island, picking at eggs and toast neither of them really wanted, and Elena felt the minutes ticking away with inexorable weight. At 5:30, Marco drove her to the institute, both of them silent during the short trip. "I'll be back at noon with Lucia," he said as she gathered her knife kit and supplies from the trunk. "We'll be in the front row, and we'll be thinking about you every second until then." "Marco," Elena's voice caught. "What if I let you down?" "Impossible," he said firmly. "You could burn every dish and I'd still be proud of you for trying, but you won't burn anything because you're too good for that." She kissed him quickly, fiercely, then forced herself to walk away before she could lose her nerve entirely. The Institute's main kitchen had been transformed for the tasting event. Student stations lined the perimeter, each set up with the same professional-grade equipment. In the center of the room, a long table had been arranged for the judging panel, 5 professional chefs and restaurateurs from across New England, plus faculty members including the formidable Professor Bernard. Elena found her assigned station and began unpacking her supplies with hands that trembled despite her best efforts. Around her, other students were doing the same, some looking confident, others clearly as terrified as she felt. "Hey," said a familiar voice. Chef Maria, her Italian regional cuisine instructor, appeared at her elbow with a warm smile. "I wanted to wish you luck before things get crazy. Your menu looks beautiful, Elena. Classic, well executed, exactly what the panel wants to see." "Thank you, Chef." Elena managed a smile. "I hope they agree." "They will. Just trust yourself and your training." Maria squeezed her shoulder. "And remember, cooking is love made visible. Let that guide you." The word settled something in Elena's chest. Cooking is love made visible. That's what her grandmother had always said. What had drawn her to this profession in the first place? Not accolades or recognition, but the simple act of nourishing people, of creating beauty and meaning through food. At precisely 7 o'clock, the event coordinator called for attention. The rules were explained. Students had 4 hours to prepare and plate their complete tasting menus, which would be served sequentially to the judging panel. Timing was crucial. Presentation mattered. And most importantly, the food had to speak for itself. "You may begin," the coordinator announced, and the kitchen erupted into controlled chaos. Elena took a deep breath and started with her mise en place, the methodical preparation that would set the foundation for everything else. Her hands moved automatically, muscle memory taking over as she chopped, measured, organized. The nervousness didn't disappear, but it transformed into focused energy, adrenaline sharpening her senses rather than paralyzing her. Her first course was a simple caprese: tomatoes, mozzarella, basil, olive oil. Nothing fancy, nothing complicated, just pure ingredients allowed to shine. But the execution had to be perfect. The tomatoes sliced to exact thickness, the mozzarella torn at the last possible moment to maintain texture, the basil picked at the peak of freshness. She worked steadily through each course, adjusting timing on the fly when she realized the fish for her third course was cooking faster than expected, compensating with an extra minute of rest time before plating. Around her, other students moved with varying degrees of confidence, some flying through their preparations, others clearly struggling. Professor Bernard walked through the kitchen periodically, observing with his usual critical eye. When he paused at Elena's station, she felt her spine stiffen defensively. "Conventional choices," he observed, his tone neutral. "Playing it safe." "Executing classic techniques to their highest standard," Elena corrected politely but firmly. "That was your feedback, Professor. Focus on fundamentals." His eyebrow rose fractionally. "Indeed it was. Let's see if you can deliver on that promise." He moved on, and Elena exhaled slowly, forcing her hands to remain steady. She wouldn't let him shake her confidence. Not today. By 11:30, the guests began arriving. Industry professionals, potential employers, faculty, and a limited number of family members. Elena caught a glimpse of the growing audience through the kitchen's observation windows and felt her stomach flip. Somewhere in that crowd were Marco and Lucia, watching, believing in her. She couldn't disappoint them. At noon precisely, the first students began plating their opening courses. Elena waited her turn, watching the judges' reactions to others' food, trying to gauge what they responded to. Some dishes earned appreciative nods. Others received polite but neutral expressions that clearly meant the food had missed the mark. When her turn came, Elena approached the judging table with her carefully arranged caprese, placing one plate in front of each judge, with hands that didn't shake despite the terror coursing through her. "Caprese salad," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the quiet room. "Representing the purity of Italian ingredients and the immigrant's memory of home. Local heirloom tomatoes, handmade mozzarella from the North End, basil grown from seeds my grandmother brought from Naples." She stepped back, folding her hands to keep from fidgeting, and watched as the judges took their first bites. The room felt impossibly silent. She could hear her own heartbeat, feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her. Then one of the judges, Antonio Russo, owner of 3 acclaimed Italian restaurants in Providence, closed his eyes and smiled. "This is what caprese should be," he said, his voice carrying that distinctive Italian-American accent Elena knew from her own family. No complications, no modern twists, just perfect ingredients treated with respect. The tomatoes are ripe but not overripe. The mozzarella has the exact texture, soft but not mushy. And that olive oil. He took another bite. This is the real thing. This is home. Relief flooded through Elena so intensely she felt dizzy. She caught sight of Marco in the audience, his eyes locked on her, and his slight nod gave her the courage to return to her station with her head high. The next 3 courses followed in quick succession, each one building on the theme of Italian-American culinary evolution. Her pasta course, simple cacio e pepe, earned praise for flawless technique. The fish course, branzino with lemon and herbs, was described as elegantly restrained. The meat course, a classic ossobuco, had one judge actually scraping his plate clean. By the time Elena plated her 5th course, a panna cotta with espresso and chocolate, her grandmother's recipe refined over years, she'd found her rhythm. The fear hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something else. Pride, maybe. Or simply the quiet confidence that came from knowing she'd done her absolute best. She watched the judges taste her dessert, saw their expression shift from professional assessment to genuine pleasure, and allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd succeeded. When all the students had finished, the judges retired to deliberate while the audience mingled and students compared notes in hushed, anxious voices. Elena made her way through the crowd, accepting congratulations from classmates and nervous smiles from friends. Then Marco was there, pulling her into his arms despite the room full of people watching. "You were incredible," he said into her hair. "Every single course. I've eaten at the best restaurants in the world, Elena, and your food was better than all of them." "You're biased," she said, but she was smiling against his chest. "I'm honest. There's a difference." He pulled back to look at her. "How do you feel?" "Terrified, relieved, exhausted, proud." Elena laughed shakily. "All of it at once." Lucia peered, her eyes wet with tears. "Tesoro, that was beautiful. Your nonna would be so proud. I'm so proud." "Thank you for coming, Signora. It meant everything to have you both here." They stood together, the 3 of them, as the judges finalized their decisions. Around them, other students gathered with their families, all waiting for the verdict that would shape their futures. Finally, the event coordinator called for attention. The room fell silent as the head of the judging panel, Chef Thomas Laurent, a Michelin-starred chef from Boston, stood to speak. "We've had the privilege today of tasting some truly exceptional food," he began. Each student brought their own vision, their own interpretation of culinary excellence, but there were a few whose work stood out not just for technical skill, but for something more difficult to define, for soul. Elena's heart hammered so hard she thought it might bruise her ribs. The top honors today go to 3 students who demonstrated mastery of both technique and philosophy. 3rd place, for innovation and creativity, Jason Chen. Applause filled the room as Jason, a talented fusion chef Elena had worked with several times, came forward beaming to accept his certificate. 2nd place, for technical perfection and modern interpretation of classical cuisine, Sarah Martinez. More applause. Sarah had done a molecular gastronomy menu that had been visually stunning. And 1st place, Chef Laurent continued, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Elena, for a menu that reminded us why we fell in love with cooking in the first place. For food that told a story, honored tradition, and achieved absolute perfection in its simplicity. Elena Rossi. The room erupted. Elena stood frozen for a moment, unable to process what she'd just heard. Then Marco's arms were around her and Lucia was crying, and somehow she was walking to the front of the room with legs that barely supported her. Chef Laurent shook her hand warmly. "Your caprese alone would have won my vote," he said, "but every course after that just confirmed what I suspected. You understand something fundamental that many chefs spend their entire careers trying to grasp. Food doesn't need to be complicated to be extraordinary. It just needs to be honest." Elena accepted the certificate with shaking hands, turned to face the applauding crowd, and found Marco's eyes in the sea of faces. He was smiling with such open pride, such pure joy, that she felt tears spill down her cheeks. She'd done it. Against all odds, despite her doubts and fears and compromises, she'd done it. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of congratulations and photographs, industry professionals pressing business cards into her hand, classmates hugging her with genuine warmth. Several restaurant owners asked if she'd be interested in interviewing for positions, and Chef Russo from Providence invited her to stage at his flagship restaurant. Through it all, Marco and Lucia stayed close, providing steady support as Elena navigated the overwhelming attention. When things finally began to wind down, Professor Bernard approached. Elena stiffened instinctively, but his expression was thoughtful rather than critical. "Congratulations, Miss Rossi," he said formally. "Your execution was flawless." "Thank you, Professor." "I'll admit I had doubts about your original concept. I still believe it was too ambitious for a student presentation." He paused, and something that might have been respect flickered in his eyes. "But you proved that sometimes the simplest approach is the strongest. You chose to master the fundamentals rather than chase innovation, and the judges recognized that wisdom." It wasn't quite an apology, but coming from Bernard, it was significant. "I appreciate that, Professor. And I appreciate the feedback that helped me refine my approach." Elena kept her voice polite but firm. "But I want you to know, I'm not done exploring that original concept. Someday, when I have my own kitchen, I'm going to tell that immigration story the way I originally envisioned it, with all 6 courses, all the complexity, all the heart." Bernard's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "I look forward to tasting it. Something tells me you'll make it work." After he left, Marco leaned close. "You just told him you're going to prove him wrong someday." "I am going to prove him wrong, just not today." Elena leaned against Marco, suddenly exhausted. "Today, I'm going to accept that I made the right choice for right now, and tomorrow I'll start planning for what comes next." "That's my girl," Marco said softly. They left the institute as the sun was setting, painting Boston's sky in shades of orange and pink. Marco drove them to a quiet Italian restaurant in the North End, not Bella Vista, but somewhere similar, intimate and warm. Over wine and food, Elena was too wrung out to cook herself, they celebrated. Lucia regaled them with stories of Giuseppe's business triumphs, drawing parallels between his determination and Elena's. Marco watched Elena with eyes full of love and pride, his hand finding hers under the table. "So what happens now?" Lucia asked as they finished their meal. "You've graduated top of your class. You have job offers. What does Elena Rossi do next?" Elena considered the question. A week ago, she would have jumped at the first stable position offered, desperate to start paying down her loans and prove to her family that culinary school hadn't been a waste. But tonight, with Marco's hand warm in hers and the glow of success still bright in her chest, she felt brave enough to want more. "I want to work for Chef Russo," she said slowly. "His Providence restaurant specializes in regional Italian cuisine, exactly what I'm passionate about. It'll be hard, long hours, probably terrible pay at first, but I'll learn from one of the best, refine my skills, build connections." "For how long?" Marco asked. "A year, maybe 2. Long enough to really master the craft at a professional level." Elena squeezed his hand. "And then I want to open my own place. Something small, intimate, a real trattoria where I can tell the stories I want to tell through food." "That's a big dream," Lucia said gently. "I know. It'll take time and money I don't have and probably a dozen failures along the way. But today proved I can do difficult things. I can work hard and achieve something meaningful." Elena looked at Marco. "And I have support now. People who believe in me." "Always," Marco said quietly. "Whatever you need, whatever it takes. I believe in you completely." They finished dinner and Marco drove Lucia home first, walking her to her door with the same careful attention he always showed. Elena watched from the car, seeing the love between mother and son, the way Marco's entire demeanor softened around Lucia. When he returned to the car, Elena said, "She's doing so much better. Your mother. She's like a different person from the woman I met that first night." "You did that," Marco said. "You brought her back to life. We did that. You, me, Thursday dinners, Italian conversations. All of it together." Elena studied his profile as he drove. "Where are we going?" "My place, if that's okay. I want to talk to you about something, and I'd rather do it privately." Something in his tone made Elena's stomach flip with nervousness, but she nodded. Marco's penthouse felt different tonight, less like a showcase of wealth and more like the home of someone who was learning what truly mattered. They settled on the couch, Marco pulling Elena against his side, both of them looking out at the city lights. "I met with my lawyers today. Marco said finally. Finalize the paperwork for the first phase of business transition. By the end of this year, I'll have divested from all protection operations. Next year, gambling. The year after that, enforcement and collection. Elena's breath caught. That's huge. It's necessary. I told you I wanted to go legitimate, and I meant it. But Elena, I need you to understand what this means. I'm walking away from significant income, from power I've held my entire adult life. Some people in my organization won't understand. Some will be angry, feel betrayed. There could be pushback, possibly even danger during the transition. Why are you telling me this? Marco turned to face her fully, his expression serious. Because I'm all in on this. On us. I'm rebuilding my life to be worthy of you, to create a future we can actually share. But I need to know you're all in too. I need to know that you understand what you're signing up for, not just my past, but the complicated process of leaving it behind. Elena's heart hammered. This was it, the moment where she had to choose between safety and love, between the careful path and the terrifying leap. I'm scared, she admitted. Your world is dangerous and complicated and so far outside my experience. But Marco, I'm more scared of living without you, of playing it safe and always wondering what could have been. Elena, let me finish. She took his hands, holding tight. Today taught me something important. I chose the safe path with my thesis menu, and I succeeded. But it wasn't the success I really wanted. It was a compromise, a calculated risk that guaranteed passing, but sacrificed vision. And you know what? I'm okay with that choice for today, but I never want to make that choice about us. Marco's eyes were intense, searching. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm all in, completely, terrifyingly, no safety net, all in. I want to build a life with you, Marco. I want Thursday dinners with your mother and late-night conversations and the messy, complicated, beautiful reality of loving someone who's fighting to become better. Tears streamed down Elena's face, but she was smiling. I want to take the risk. I want to choose love over safety. I want us. Marco kissed her then, deep and desperate and full of promises. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead against hers. I love you so much it scares me, he whispered. I've spent my whole life in control, managing every variable, protecting myself. But with you, I'm completely exposed, completely vulnerable, and somehow that feels right. It feels right because it is right, Elena said. Love is supposed to scare us. It's supposed to push us beyond our comfort zones and make us braver than we knew we could be. They sat together in the quiet of Marco's penthouse, holding each other as the city glittered below. And in that moment, Elena understood something fundamental about the path she'd chosen. Yes, loving Marco would be complicated. Yes, there would be challenges and risks and moments of doubt, but there would also be passion and growth and the kind of deep partnership that transformed both people into better versions of themselves. She'd spent her whole life fighting to preserve traditions, to honor the past while building toward the future. Loving Marco was the same thing, honoring who he'd been while supporting who he was becoming, and that was worth any risk. Over the next few months, Elena's life transformed in ways she'd never anticipated. She accepted the position with Chef Russo in Providence, commuting 2 hours each way to work brutal shifts in a professional kitchen that demanded everything she had to give. The work was exhausting, relentless, sometimes crushing in its intensity, but she loved it, every minute of it. Marco supported her without trying to fix things, driving to Providence on her days off so they could spend time together, never complaining about the distance or the limited hours they had. He was transitioning his own life with equal determination, slowly and carefully divesting from the darker aspects of his business. It wasn't easy. Some of his longtime associates did push back, questioning his motives, his judgment. There were tense meetings and difficult negotiations. But Marco held firm, guided by the vision of the future he wanted to build. Lucia thrived in the warmth of their growing relationship, her health and spirits improving dramatically. She started taking Italian classes, reconnecting with her heritage in ways she hadn't since Giuseppe's death. She volunteered at a cultural center in the North End, teaching younger generations about traditional cooking and customs. Thursday dinners continued, now sometimes at Trattoria Bella Vista, sometimes at Marco's penthouse where Elena would cook for the three of them. Those evenings became sacred time, a reminder of how far they'd all come and how much they'd all grown. On a warm evening in early June, nearly a year after that first Thursday dinner, Marco took Elena to a small restaurant in the North End she'd never visited. It was closed for a private event, he explained, leading her through the door. Inside, the space had been transformed. Candles everywhere, flowers on every surface, soft music playing, and in the center of it all, a single table set for two. "Marco," Elena breathed, "what is this?" "This," he said, turning to face her with eyes full of love, "is a proposal. Not the proposal. That comes later. But a proposal nonetheless." He led her to the table where papers were spread out, architectural plans, business proposals, financial documents. "I've been working on something for the past 6 months," Marco said, "a project I couldn't tell you about because I wanted it to be perfect before I showed you. Elena, I'm buying this building, and I want to turn it into your restaurant." Elena's hands flew to her mouth. "What?" "Your trattoria. The one you talked about, where you can tell your immigration story through food, where families can come for Sunday dinner, where traditions are preserved and celebrated." Marco took her hands, his voice urgent. "I'm not asking you to quit your job with Russo. You're learning too much, growing too much. But in a year, maybe 2, when you're ready, this can be yours. Fully yours. Not some partnership where I control anything. I'll provide the capital and the space, but the vision, the menu, the soul of it, that's all you." Tears streamed down Elena's face as she looked at the plans, at the dream she'd barely dared to articulate being laid out in black and white. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this?" "Because I love you. Because watching you chase your dreams makes me want to be better. Because you gave my mother back her joy and gave me back my hope." Marco cupped her face gently. "Because you deserve to tell your story your way, without compromise or constraint. And because I have the resources to make it happen, so why wouldn't I use them for something that matters?" Elena laughed through her tears. "This is crazy. This is the most generous, insane, beautiful thing anyone's ever done for me. Is that a yes?" "It's not a yes yet. It's a maybe, pending about 1,000 questions and detailed conversations about ownership structure and financial arrangements." And she stopped, seeing his expression. "But Marco, it's also the most incredible gift anyone's ever offered me. Thank you. Even if I ultimately decide I need to do this on my own, thank you for believing in me this much." "I'll always believe in you," Marco said simply. "That's the easy part." They spent the next 2 hours going through the plans, Elena asking sharp questions about zoning and permits and operational costs, Marco answering with the detailed knowledge of someone who'd clearly done exhaustive research. By the time they left, Elena's head was spinning with possibilities. "I need time to think about this," she said as Marco drove her home. "It's an amazing opportunity, but I need to make sure I'm accepting it for the right reasons. Not because it's easy or because I love you, but because it's genuinely the best path forward. Take all the time you need. The offer stands regardless of when or if you accept it." They pulled up outside her apartment, and Elena turned to face him in the dim light. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Earlier, you said this was a proposal, not the proposal. What did you mean?" Marco smiled, slow and warm. "I meant that I have every intention of asking you to marry me someday, Elena Rossi. When the time is right, when we've both built the lives we want to live, when you're absolutely certain that I'm what you want." Elena's breath caught. "And if I said I was already certain? Then I'd say you're exhausted from a long day and not thinking clearly." But his eyes were serious, searching hers. "Marriage is forever, Elena. I won't ask until I'm sure you understand exactly what you're choosing, all of it, the good and the complicated. I won't ask until I'm the man you deserve, not just the man I'm trying to become." "You're already that man," Elena said softly. "But I understand what you're saying, and you're right. We should both be sure. We should both have built the lives we want first." "Exactly." Marco kissed her gently. "But know this. I'm planning for forever with you. Every decision I make, every change I implement, it's all building toward a future where we can be together without shadows, or secrets, or fears." Elena kissed him back, pouring all her love and trust and hope into it. When they finally pulled apart, she was smiling through happy tears. I love you, Marco De Luca, and I'm planning for forever too. Good, he said, pulling her close, because I'm not letting you go, ever. They sat in the car for a long time, holding each other in the quiet darkness, both of them looking toward a future that finally felt possible. A future built on honesty and respect, on supporting each other's dreams without losing themselves in the process. It wouldn't be easy. Elena's career would demand sacrifice and grueling work. Marco's transition would require patience and careful navigation. There would be challenges, setbacks, moments of doubt, but they would face all of it together. Because they'd both learned the same essential truth, that love wasn't about finding someone perfect or safe or uncomplicated. Love was about finding someone worth fighting for, worth growing for, worth becoming better for. And they had found each other. In a restaurant in Boston's North End, over Thursday dinners and Italian conversations, two people from different worlds had discovered something rare and precious, a connection that transcended backgrounds and circumstances, that transformed both of them into fuller, braver versions of themselves. Marco had found someone who made him want to build, instead of just protect, to create beauty instead of just control outcomes. Elena had found someone who believed in her dreams as fiercely as she did, who supported without smothering, who loved her exactly as she was while encouraging her to become everything she could be. Together, they were building something that honored their pasts while embracing their futures. Something rooted in tradition but open to transformation. Something that would last not because it was easy, but because it was real. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Love, partnership, home. Not a place, but a person. Not safety, but courage. Not the absence of risk, but the willingness to take it for something, someone, worth everything. They had found their home in each other, and that was enough. 2 years passed like a river, sometimes rushing with the intensity of white water, sometimes flowing calm and deep, but always moving forward. Elena and Marco built their life together in the spaces between her brutal kitchen shifts and his methodical business transformation, in stolen weekends and late-night phone calls, in the quiet certainty that they were moving toward something permanent. Elena thrived under Chef Russo's demanding tutelage, learning techniques and philosophies that textbooks could never teach. She worked the line during crushing dinner services, prepped ingredients until her hands cramped, absorbed everything the kitchen could teach her about running a professional operation. The exhaustion was real, the sacrifices significant, but so was the growth. Marco kept his promise, divesting from the darker corners of his empire with strategic precision. It cost him power and money, earned him enemies and skeptics, but with each operation he walked away from, he felt lighter, more himself. The legitimate businesses flourished under his full attention: real estate, import companies, investments that built things rather than controlled them. And through it all, Lucia bloomed. She took Italian citizenship classes, traveled back to Naples for the first time in 40 years, reconnected with cousins she'd thought were lost to time. She moved with a lightness that made her seem decades younger, her laughter frequent and genuine. "Your mother is happy," Elena said one Thursday evening as they prepared dinner together in Marco's kitchen. Lucia had gone to visit a friend, leaving them alone for the first time all week. "Really, deeply happy. I can see it in everything she does." "She's planning a trip to Sorrento next month," Marco said, chopping vegetables with the competent efficiency Elena Auden had taught him. "She wants to visit the town where she and my father honeymooned. She says she's finally ready to remember without it destroying her." Elena paused in her stirring, touched by the revelation. "That's beautiful. Is she going alone?" "She wants us to come with her." Marco met her eyes. 3 weeks in Italy, Naples, Sorrento, Rome. She's already planning which restaurants we have to visit, which markets we need to see. She's making lists. 3 weeks, Elena repeated, her mind immediately calculating. "I'd have to request time off from Russo. He's not going to like it." "Then quit." Elena's spoon stilled. "What?" Marco set down his knife, wiping his hands on a towel before turning to face her fully. "Elena, you've learned everything Russo can teach you. You've worked the line, managed prep, even covered for his sous chef twice. You're ready for the next step." "I'm not sure I am. I've watched you grow over these 2 years. watched you transform from a talented student into a professional chef who can hold her own in any kitchen. You're ready to open your own place. He pulled out his phone, opening a folder of photos. And I have something to show you. The images showed the North End building in various stages of renovation. Walls being torn down, new equipment being installed, a kitchen taking shape that made Elena's breath catch. "You've been working on it," she said, scrolling through the pictures with trembling hands. "For the last 18 months. I know you said you needed time to think about my offer, and I respect that. But I also know you, Elena. You'll never feel completely ready. You'll always find one more technique to master, one more skill to refine. So I'm asking you now, are you ready to stop preparing and start doing?" Elena looked at the photos, at the dream taking physical form, and felt terror and exhilaration war in her chest. This was it. The moment where she either leaped or spent the rest of her life wondering what could have been. "I want creative control," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Complete creative control over the menu, the concept, the execution." "Absolutely. And I want to buy in. Not immediately, I don't have that kind of capital, but I want a path to ownership, a percentage that increases as I pay down the investment." Marco's smile was proud. "Already drawn up by my lawyers. You start at 20% ownership, increasing 5% annually until you own 51%. At which point, if you want to buy me out completely, we can negotiate that too." "You'd really give up majority ownership?" "It's your restaurant, Elena. Your vision, your heart, your story to tell. I'm just providing the space and the capital. The soul of it has to be yours, or it won't work." Elena set down the phone with shaking hands. "I'm terrified." "Good. That means it matters." Marco pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "But you don't have to be terrified alone. We'll do this together. You running the kitchen, me handling the business side. Partners in every sense. When would we open? That's up to you. The space will be ready by September. You could open as early as October if you wanted, or wait until after the new year. There's no rush." Elena buried her face against his chest, breathing in his familiar scent, drawing strength from his solid presence. 2 years ago, she'd been a waitress working 3 jobs and wondering if her dreams would ever amount to anything. Now she stood on the precipice of everything she'd ever wanted, offered by a man who believed in her more than she believed in herself. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's do it. Let's open a restaurant." Marco's arms tightened around her. "Yeah? Yeah. I'll give Russo my notice tomorrow. We'll go to Italy with your mother. And when we come back, I'll start planning the menu and hiring staff and—" She laughed, slightly hysterical. "Oh God, we're really doing this." "We're really doing this," Marco confirmed, and the joy in his voice made Elena's heart swell. They told Lucia over dinner that night, and her reaction was everything Elena could have hoped for. She cried, she laughed, she immediately started planning what she would contribute. Family recipes, connections to suppliers in the North End, her blessing and support. "Your nonna would be so proud," Lucia said, gripping Elena's hands across the table. "She would see what you're building and know that her legacy lives on, that the traditions she fought to preserve are being honored by someone who truly understands their value." "I'm going to call it Casa Rossi," Elena said, the name coming to her with sudden clarity. "Rossi House, a tribute to my grandmother, to her teaching, to everything she represented." "Perfect," Marco said softly. "Absolutely perfect." The trip to Italy happened in late July. 3 weeks of hot sun and incredible food, of exploring markets and tasting wines, of watching Lucia reconnect with her homeland and her history. They visited the restaurant where Giuseppe had proposed to Lucia, stood in the small church where they'd been married, walked the streets of Naples where both their families had lived for generations. Elena absorbed everything, flavors and techniques, ingredients she'd never worked with, preparations she'd only read about. She filled notebooks with ideas, took hundreds of photos, tasted everything she could find. This was research for Casa Rossi, inspiration for the menu that would tell her immigration story. But it was also more than that. It was understanding, on a visceral level, what it meant to have roots in a place, to carry culture forward across oceans and generations. She saw herself in the old women making pasta by hand in tiny kitchens, in the grandmothers teaching their granddaughters the family recipes, in the fierce pride people took in their regional specialties. This was what she wanted to preserve. This connection, this continuation, this passing of knowledge and love through food. One evening in Sorrento, as they watched the sun set over the Mediterranean, Lucia turned to them with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply, "for bringing me back here, for making me brave enough to remember." "Thank you for sharing this with us," Elena replied, taking her hand, "for teaching me what it means to honor the past while building the future." Marco wrapped his arms around both of them, and they stood together watching the light fade over water that had witnessed thousands of years of stories, of families, of love. "I'm going to ask her to marry me," Marco said quietly to his mother later that night, after Elena had gone to bed. They sat on the hotel balcony, sharing wine and the comfortable silence of people who knew each other completely. "I know," Lucia said, smiling. "I've known for months. When we get back to Boston. After Casa Rossi opens, once she's had time to settle into the restaurant, to feel confident and grounded." He swirled his wine thoughtfully. "I want her to know that I'm choosing her not because she needs me, but because I need her, because we're equals building something together." "She already knows that, Marco, but I understand wanting the moment to be right." Lucia patted his hand. "Your father proposed to me in a restaurant, did you know that? Nothing fancy, just a small trattoria in Naples. He got down on one knee right there in front of everyone, and when I said yes, the entire restaurant cheered. I remember that story. He told me later that he chose a restaurant because food was what brought us together. I worked at my uncle's bakery, and he came in every morning for fresh bread. 50 mornings before he worked up the courage to ask me out." Lucia's eyes were distant with memory. "Food is how we show love, how we build community, how we mark the important moments. It's fitting that you and Elena found each other the same way." "Everything important in my life has happened around a table," Marco said quietly. "Sunday dinners with you and Papa, business deals that changed everything, and Thursday nights with Elena, watching her bring you back to life. Then make sure when you propose, it's around a table too. Make it part of your story, your tradition." Marco nodded, the plan taking shape in his mind. They returned to Boston in mid-August, tanned and full of inspiration. Elena immediately threw herself into the restaurant preparation with the same intense focus she brought to everything. She worked with Marco's contractors on final kitchen details, interviewed potential staff, tested recipes obsessively in Marco's home kitchen until she was satisfied with every element. The menu came together as a love letter to immigration, not her original ambitious 6-course concept, but something more refined. 5 courses that trace the journey from Italy to America and back again, each dish telling part of the story while standing beautifully on its own. She hired a small but talented team, a sous chef who'd trained in Florence, a line cook with strong fundamentals and eagerness to learn, a pastry chef whose Italian grandmother had taught her the old ways. Each person brought their own connection to the cuisine, their own piece of the story. Marco handled permits and licenses, marketing and financial planning, all the administrative work that Elena had no patience for. They made a good team, each playing to their strengths, communicating constantly, building something neither could have achieved alone. Opening night was scheduled for October the 15th, exactly 2 years after that first Thursday dinner at Trattoria Bella Vista. The week before, Elena barely slept. She ran practice services with her team, refined timing, adjusted plating. Marco watched her drive herself to exhaustion and resisted every instinct to make her rest, understanding that this was her process, her way of preparing for something that mattered this much. The night before opening, he found her in the Casa Rossi kitchen at midnight, prepping ingredients that didn't need to be prepped for another 12 hours. "Elena," he said gently, "come home. You need sleep. I need to make sure everything is perfect." "It is perfect. You've checked everything 3 times. Your team knows the menu backwards and forwards. The only thing you're accomplishing now is exhausting yourself before the biggest night of your life." Elena set down her knife, her hands trembling. "What if nobody comes? What if they come and hate it? What if I've built this whole thing on a dream that doesn't actually translate to reality?" Marco crossed the kitchen and took her hand, stilling their tremor. "Then we learn from it and adjust. But that won't happen, Because you're brilliant and the food is incredible. Elena, I've watched you prepare for this. I've tasted every dish. This restaurant is going to be everything you dreamed and more. You have to say that. You love me. I do love you. But I'm also a businessman who's invested significant capital in this venture. If I thought it would fail, I'd tell you. He pulled her close. Trust yourself. Trust your training, your instincts, your team. You're ready. Elena sagged against him, exhaustion and nerves finally catching up. Okay, let's go home. They drove through Boston's quiet streets, Elena's head resting against the window, Marco's hand warm on her knee. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said as they pulled up to his building. Their building now, since Elena had officially moved in 3 months ago. I'm proud of you, for having the courage to try, to risk, to chase something this big. Even if I fail spectacularly? You won't fail. But even if you did, I'd still be proud. Failure trying is better than success from never attempting anything meaningful. Elena kissed him softly. When did you become so wise? Loving you taught me what actually matters. Everything else followed from that. Opening night arrived with crisp autumn air and clear skies. Elena woke early despite having gone to bed late, her mind already racing through the evening's prep. Marco made her breakfast and forced her to eat, then drove her to Casa Rossi 2 hours before the team was due to arrive. The restaurant looked beautiful in the morning light. Intimate dining room with warm lighting, open kitchen where diners could watch the magic happen, photographs on the walls showing Italian immigrants in early Boston, their stories told in faded sepia tones. This is it, Elena whispered, standing in the middle of her dream made real. This is it, Marco confirmed. Ready? No, but I'm doing it anyway. Her team arrived one by one, each greeting her with nervous excitement. They moved through prep with the efficiency of a well-rehearsed dance, months of practice coming together seamlessly. By 6 o'clock, when the first reservations were due to arrive, the kitchen hummed with controlled energy. Marco had returned home to change and collect Lucia, promising to be back for the first seating. Elena stood in her chef's whites, her team around her, and felt a moment of perfect clarity. This was what she was meant to do. This was home. The first guests arrived, food critics Marco had quietly invited, industry professionals, friends, and supporters. The dining room filled with conversation and anticipation. And in the kitchen, Elena called out the first orders with steady confidence. 2 caprese, 3 primi, 1 secondi. Let's show them what we can do. The service was beautiful. Dishes went out perfectly plated, timed to arrive in smooth succession. The kitchen moved like a living thing, everyone in sync, communication clear and calm. Elena tasted everything before it left the pass, adjusting seasoning with tiny touches, ensuring perfection. She caught glimpses of the dining room between orders, Marco and Lucia at a center table, both beaming with pride. Chef Russo, who'd made the trip from Providence to support his former protege. Other chefs from around Boston, industry people who'd come to see if the hype was deserved. The real test came with dessert service, when Elena finally allowed herself to step out of the kitchen and into the dining room. The applause was immediate and overwhelming. People stood, clapping and cheering, and Elena felt tears prick her eyes. She made her way through the room, thanking people for coming, accepting congratulations with grace she didn't know she possessed. And when she reached Marco and Lucia's table, they both stood to embrace her. You did it, Lucia said, crying openly. Tesoro, you did it. Your nonna would be so proud. We did it, Elena corrected, looking at Marco. All of us together. The critics' reviews came out over the next few days, and they were unanimously glowing. Casa Rossi was called a triumph of traditional technique, a love letter to Italian-American heritage, the most exciting new restaurant in Boston. Reservations filled up weeks in advance. Elena's phone rang constantly with interview requests, partnership offers, opportunities she'd never imagined. Through it all, Marco stayed steady beside her, handling the business side, protecting her time so she could focus on the kitchen, celebrating every success and supporting through every challenge. 3 months after opening, on a cold January evening, Marco convinced Elena to take her first night off since Casa Rossi had opened its doors. The team can handle one service without you, he insisted, and I'm taking you somewhere special. Where? You'll see. He drove them to Trattoria Bella Vista, the restaurant where everything had started. Giovanni greeted them with knowing smiles and led them to their usual table in the back corner, the same table where Elena had first spoken Italian to Lucia, where Thursday dinners had become ritual, and then family. This feels significant, Elena said as they settled in. It is significant. Marco took her hand across the table, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. 2 years ago, I brought my mother here expecting a quiet dinner. Instead, I found you, and you changed everything. Marco, let me finish. He smiled, nervous in a way Elena had never seen him. You brought my mother back to life. You showed me what it meant to build things instead of just protecting them. You challenged me to be better, to want more, to believe in futures that seemed impossible. Elena's heart hammered as Marco stood and moved around the table, kneeling beside her chair. The restaurant had gone quiet, other diners noticing what was happening. Elena Rossi, you are the bravest, most passionate, most extraordinary person I've ever known. You fight for your dreams with everything you have. You honor tradition while creating something new. You make me want to be worthy of you every single day. His voice shook slightly. I love you more than I thought I was capable of loving anyone, and I want to spend the rest of my life building things with you, supporting your dreams, and being your partner in everything. He pulled out a ring, simple, elegant, a single diamond that caught the light. Will you marry me? Elena couldn't speak through her tears, could only nod frantically as Marco slipped the ring onto her finger. The restaurant erupted in applause, just like it had when Giuseppe proposed to Lucia all those years ago. Yes, Elena finally managed. Yes, of course, yes. Marco stood, pulling her into his arms, and kissed her while Trattoria Bella Vista cheered around them. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying, Giovanni appeared with champagne and Lucia, because of course Lucia had been in on this, had been waiting in the kitchen for her cue. I'm so happy for you both, Lucia said, embracing them together. This is exactly right. Exactly as it should be. They celebrated late into the night, calling friends and family, accepting congratulations from other diners, laughing until Elena's cheeks hurt. And through it all, Marco kept Elena's hand in his, the ring glinting in the candlelight, a promise of the future they would build together. The wedding took place 6 months later in Naples, a small ceremony in the same church where Giuseppe and Lucia had married. Elena wore her grandmother's veil, carefully preserved through decades. Marco wore his father's cufflinks. Lucia cried through the entire ceremony, as did half the guests. They honeymooned in Sorrento, eating their way through the Amalfi Coast, collecting recipes and inspiration for Casa Rossi's seasonal menu changes. And when they returned to Boston, tanned and happy and more in love than ever, they threw themselves back into the work they both loved. Casa Rossi continued to thrive, earning recognition not just for excellent food, but for the story it told, the traditions it preserved, the community it built. Elena trained young chefs the way her grandmother had trained her, with patience and love and high standards. She taught them that cooking was more than technique, more than business. It was legacy, culture, connection. Marco's business transformation completed its final phase 2 years after the wedding. He walked away from the last vestiges of his criminal empire and never looked back, his energy now focused entirely on legitimate ventures and on supporting Elena's growing restaurant operation. Lucia lived to see her first grandchild, Sofia Giuseppe De Luca, named for Marco's grandmother and father. The baby had Elena's eyes and Marco's determination, and Lucia doted on her shamelessly, teaching her Italian words before she could even walk properly. Your nonna would have loved her, Lucia said one afternoon as they watched Sofia toddle around Casa Rossi's dining room, already fascinated by the kitchen. She would have, Elena agreed, her hand resting on her growing belly. Baby number 2 was due in the spring. But she would have loved all of this. The restaurant, the family, the traditions continuing. You've honored her legacy beautifully, Lucia said. And you're building your own legacy now, one that will last for generations. Elena looked around the restaurant, at the photos on the walls, at the open kitchen where her team worked with passion and skill, at Marco playing with Sofia while discussing expansion possibilities with Vincent. This was more than a business. It was family, community, tradition, and innovation all woven together. It was exactly what she dreamed of, and more than she dared to hope for. That evening, after service ended and the team had gone home, Elena and Marco stood in the quiet dining room with Lucia and Sofia, 4 generations of love and tradition gathered in a space that honored the past while embracing the future. "Do you ever think about that first Thursday dinner?" Elena asked Marco, resting her head against his shoulder as Sofia dozed in Lucia's arms. "Every day," he said honestly. "I think about how close I came to losing my mother to grief, how lost I felt in my own life. And I think about how everything changed because you were kind to a lonely old woman." "I wasn't being kind, I was being human." "That's the same thing, Tesoro," Lucia said softly. "Being human, being kind, being connected, it's all the same, and it's what saves us from the darkness." Elena looked at her family, her husband, his mother who'd become her own, their daughter who carried forward the legacy of 2 cultures, 2 families, 2 stories woven into one. This was what she'd fought for, what all the exhaustion and sacrifice and risk had been building toward. Not just success, though Casa Rossi was undeniably successful. Not just love, though she loved Marco more each day. But connection, continuation. The knowledge that the traditions her grandmother had fought to preserve were being passed down to another generation, enriched and honored and kept alive. "Shall we?" Marco asked, gesturing to the kitchen. It had become their ritual. After everyone else left, after Sofia was asleep, Elena and Marco would cook together. Nothing elaborate, just simple food made with love, shared at the same table where they'd planned their future. Tonight, Elena made her grandmother's pasta recipe, while Marco prepared sauce, the 2 of them moving around each other with the easy rhythm of partners who knew each other completely. Lucia sat at the counter with sleeping Sofia, watching them with contented eyes. "This is everything I wanted for you," she said as they ate. "A life built on love and passion and purpose. Your father would have loved Elena, Marco. He would have seen what I see, someone who makes you better, who challenges you, who gives you reasons to build instead of just protect." "He would have loved that she makes the best carbonara in Boston," Marco added, making Elena laugh. "Second best," she corrected. "You haven't tasted Lucia's recipe yet." "That's because Mama's keeping secrets." "Some secrets are meant to be kept until the right moment," Lucia said mysteriously, "and some are meant to be passed down when the next generation is ready." They finished their meal in comfortable silence, then cleaned up together. A family built not by blood alone, but by choice, by love, by the decision to see each other and accept what they saw. As they prepared to leave, Elena paused in the doorway of Casa Rossi, looking back at the space that represented everything she'd fought for. "Thank you," she said to Marco. "For what?" "For believing in me, for supporting my dreams without trying to control them, for being patient while I learned to accept help without losing myself, for building this life with me." Marco kissed her softly. "Thank you for taking a chance on a complicated man with a dangerous past, for seeing who I could become instead of just who I was, for making me believe in futures that seemed impossible." "We made each other brave," Elena said. "We did," Marco agreed. "And we'll keep making each other brave. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." They walked out into the Boston night, Lucia carrying Sofia while Marco's arm wrapped around Elena's waist. Behind them, Casa Rossi stood warm and welcoming, a beacon of tradition and innovation, of heritage honored and futures built. This was home, not a place, but people. Not safety, but the courage to risk everything for something that mattered. Not the absence of fear, but the presence of love strong enough to make the fear worthwhile. Elena had started with a dream of preserving her grandmother's legacy, of honoring tradition through food. She'd achieved that dream and discovered something even more precious, a family built on respect and support, a partnership that made both people stronger, a love that transformed ordinary moments into something sacred. Marco had started with power and loneliness, with an empire built on shadows and a mother disappearing into grief. He'd found purpose in Elena's passion, redemption in her belief, and a future worth building through her courage. Together, they had created something neither could have achieved alone, something that would last beyond them, carried forward by their children and their children's children. a tradition of love and food and family that honored the past while embracing whatever the future held. The city lights glittered around them as they walked home through streets Marco had once controlled through fear, now simply part of the landscape of their life. Somewhere in the North End, other families gathered around tables, sharing meals and stories, building their own traditions. And in that continuation, that endless cycle of food and love and memory, Elena's grandmother lived on. Not just in recipes and techniques, but in the choice to honor what mattered, to fight for beauty in a harsh world, to pass forward the legacy of connection that made life worth living. This was the story Elena had wanted to tell through Casa Rossi, the story of immigration and adaptation, of traditions preserved and reinvented, of love overcoming distance and difference. But it was also their story. Marco and Elena, two people from different worlds who found each other across a restaurant table and decided to build something beautiful together. They had succeeded beyond anything either had imagined possible, and they were just beginning.